That humanoid looks different from the rest. Is that why they are avoiding him? Rusty had already noticed the absence of other races in the academy. It seemed that this place also divided people by class, with nobles as always holding the highest rank. The young man in question appeared different from the others. The difference was subtle, yet it was clear that he was not entirely human. The young man stood apart from the others with his arms crossed, his posture radiating disinterest. Even from a distance, Rusty could tell there was something unusual about him. His orange hair had faint black streaks near the roots, and his eyes were slitted like a cat's. When he shifted slightly, Rusty noticed elongated fangs that were longer than what any normal human would have. It became clear to him that this youth had beastman blood running through his veins. Once the groups were formed, the young man stood out like a sore thumb. He was about 2 meters tall and did not appear to be someone who belonged among the other summoners. To Rusty, he seemed more like a warrior who happened to possess some mana. He seems stronger than the others, but his mana is only average. The other students whispered as they glanced at him, their voices low but filled with unease. Don't look at him. He might bite you. Are they really stuck with him? I wouldn't want to be in their place. Be quiet. What if he hears you? As the whispers spread, the young man turned his gaze toward them. The instant he did, they all looked away as if a wild animal had fixed its eyes on them. Though Urania appeared to be the leader of this B class, this man was clearly feared and possibly close to her in strength. Is everyone ready? After a short while, all the groups were chosen except for Rusty's, which still lacked a third member. The teacher noticed this quickly. His eyes lingered on the young man leaning against the column, and with a disappointed tone, he called out to him. Sibber Tygrys, you will join Gwendolyn Rainstar and Astrella Fjord. The teacher announced, his tone leaving no room for objection. Rusty could feel Gwen's shoulders stiffen immediately and saw Astrella's smile fade at the announcement. It was clear that the two had hoped for a more ordinary third member instead of the person the entire class avoided. Part of it might have been prejudice against his bloodline, yet he also carried a dangerous air, like a beast waiting for the right moment to strike. Sibber did not seem to care. He uncrossed his arms and pushed himself away from the column. When he walked forward, it was like a predator stepping into enemy territory. His movements were strangely fluid, and the sunlight caught his hair, making it shimmer like burning embers. Up close, Rusty could see more clearly that those eyes truly belonged to a feline. Gee, good day. Surprisingly, Gwen was the first to break the ice as she greeted the young man who stood a head taller than her. When she did, his yellow feline eyes locked on hers, making her flinch. Astrella reacted quickly and stepped between them, but Rusty did not. To him, the young man did not seem that fierce. More than hostility, he sensed curiosity. He was not sure if he was mistaken, but his instincts told him this was the case. Hey, back off. Just don't get in my way. Sibber replied and then turned his head to avoid their gazes. We'll see who gets in whose way. Astrella crossed her arms, clearly unimpressed, though her forced smile betrayed her unease. Gwen glanced nervously between the two of them, unsure how to ease the tension already forming within their small group. Rusty tilted his head, studying the beastman's expression. He doesn't seem hostile, just impatient. Maybe he dislikes talking. This time Rusty spoke so Gwen could hear him through their link. She seemed surprised by his assessment and quickly asked him to explain. He isn't hostile. He doesn't seem like the others. I don't think he means any harm to you. Rusty had experience dealing with monsters, bandits, and other humans. At first, he could not tell their expressions apart, but he had been studying carefully. He could now more or less read what people were feeling, though describing how he knew was still difficult. I don't know, but if you say so. Gwendolyn was clearly surprised by this revelation and began staring at the young man. His uniform was different as well. Most were designed like mage robes with hoods, but Sibber's outfit looked more practical and suited for combat. He wore regular pants, a white shirt, and a black jacket left open at the collar, revealing part of his neck. For some reason, he was allowed to wear this modified school uniform. Are you two done staring? Sibber's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Gwen instantly turned her head away, flustered, while Astrella huffed and placed her hands on her hips. We're just trying to figure out what kind of person you are. Astrella said with a frown on her face. Does that matter? His tone was calm yet cold. It was clear he had little interest in working with them. Without another word, he started walking forward, ignoring the two girls calling out to him. "Hey, where are you going? We are supposed to work as a group." Estrella shouted, but the young man did not respond. So annoying. Who does he think he is? She was clearly furious, and Gwen tried to calm her down. "It's fine, Estrella. I think he's just going ahead to the gate entrance. Look, the other students have already started moving." As she spoke, the teacher pointed forward, and the group began to move. Rusty remained silent, observing with interest the strange tiers in space that awaited them ahead. "I'm sure you've all been inside of a rift, but do not confuse that one with this." Once they assembled, they stood in a large chamber with a glowing rift in space before them. This was the first time Rusty had seen anything like it. The gate was blue in color, similar to regular mana but in a darker shade. It was oval in shape, about 3 meters tall and 1.5 meters wide. It hovered above the ground, which was covered with several layers of magic circles that probably kept it stable. The gate you entered in the past was an F-rank gate that contained only weak creatures. This one is an E-rank randomized gate. Once your groups enter, you will be sent into a random sector within the void dimension. The environment, mana density, and creature levels will vary depending on where you appear. Your task is to collect magic crystals from the creatures you defeat. Gather enough within the time limit and return to the entrance to receive a passing grade. Rusty listened to the explanation, but it seemed that all the students already knew this information. From what he understood, they needed to reach a specific threshold to pass. If they failed to do so, they would still receive a low grade, which could eventually lead to demotion to C class if they continued to perform poorly. Randomized sector? That sounds dangerous. What if we end up somewhere dangerous? Gwen gulped softly while looking at the gate entrance and the first group moving through it. But that's the fun part. Don't worry about it, this guy will protect us, won't he? Estrella responded while grabbing Rusty off Gwen's shoulder. She spun him through the air and then placed him on the ground. "Of course, I will defeat any monster that comes my way," Rusty proclaimed while pointing his small halberd into the air, which made Estrella chuckle. "See, he looks motivated." Gwen smiled at Rusty, who was still in his small form, but this would not last for long as he could feel the wards around them weakening. He turned his large head toward the gate through which some students were passing. Some of their monsters were already at full size, and it seemed the restrictions were lifted just before the entrance. This was perhaps to allow the monsters to be ready once they stepped through the gate, as it would make it much easier to protect their summoners. If it's like this, then... Though Gwen didn't give him an order, he didn't care to wait. Once he saw the opportunity, he activated the creature reduction skill in reverse to regain his true form. His body began glowing and started to expand. The halberd and shield he was holding grew along with him, and in just a few seconds, he was back to his original size. "I'm normal again." He raised both hands as he cheered, which made Estrella laugh in delight. Eri floated forward and landed on Rusty's shoulder in a similar way to how Gleam liked to perch. She struck a powerful pose as if she were ready for battle as well, mimicking Rusty. "See, both Rusty and Eri are ready. There is nothing to fear." Gwen nodded at these reassuring words, but Sibber, their third-party member, only rolled his eyes in annoyance. He stood a few steps away from the girls and waited for their turn to enter the gate. When their turn finally came, Rusty noticed Gwen holding her stomach. It looked like a sign of nervousness, so he moved closer to give her a reassuring tap on the shoulder. "Don't worry, nothing will happen, and I bet we'll get the best grade in all of B class. So don't be scared." "I'm not scared," Gwen muttered to herself, but her voice betrayed her. "Maybe just a little." Rusty could sense her trying to collect herself and stand tall. He still thought of her as a bit of a crybaby, yet she did seem different from the last time he had spoken with her. Rusty straightened to his full height, and the light from the gate reflected off his metal frame. "Stay behind me. I'll secure the entry point." "Right. Let's go then." Gwen nodded and looked to Estrella, who returned the gesture. Sibber remained in the back without summoning anything and simply waited. When the three summoners gathered around the gate, the teacher gave a nod, and they moved forward. Rusty led the way while Eri stayed perched on Estrella's shoulder. Soon, the gate rippled around Rusty's frame as he stepped through it. Whoa! It was a strange sensation, as if he were submerged in a basin of water. He could not move his body, and the world shimmered around him. The feeling reminded him of something from his past, but before he could recall what it was, the sensation faded. When his vision cleared, it revealed a vast cavern dimly lit by veins of blue light that traced the walls and illuminated a single wide path ahead. Now it was finally time to stretch his legs. He had spent almost an entire day and night in his minimized form. With his halberd raised and his shield held forward, he stepped into the tunnel to assess the situation. His life detection skill revealed several creatures waiting around the next corner, but they showed no sign of reacting to his presence. Behind him lay the rift opening in a solid wall, leaving only one route to confront them. He waited there, watching and listening for Gwen, Astrella, and Sibber to arrive. Ah! I can never get used to that feeling. Astrella was the next to emerge, clutching her mouth as Eri gently patted her back and cast a recovery spell to ease her nausea. Gwen appeared soon after and seemed entirely fine. She looked around with curiosity rather than fear. Sibber was the last to step through the rift, which, to Rusty's surprise, remained active. Does that mean we can leave at any time? The teacher had given them some instructions, but Rusty still did not fully understand how this new trial worked. Their task was to hunt monsters, gather materials, and return to the rift to go back. It sounded simple enough, yet he doubted this would be the end of his mission. Once this excursion was complete, he would likely need to ensure Gwen's victory over the second B-class opponents. Only then would he be allowed to return. I wonder what would happen if I failed. As he looked around, a troubling thought crept into his mind. His missions had been tied to specific summoners and locations within the Soul Forge, but he did not know if those bonds were permanent. If he failed to protect Gwen in one of these dangerous spaces, would she ever be able to summon him again? He still could not tell whether this place was an elaborate illusion or a real world, yet for now, he leaned toward believing it was real. This structure looks like a Type G1 labyrinth void. Gwen commented. Once they arrived, she placed her hand on one of the walls and began speaking. Rusty, of course, had no idea what she was talking about, so he asked. What's that? Oh, it's a void with a closed labyrinth. It would be better to mark the walls with something so we can find our way back to the entrance. Gwen replied through their connection. Astrella, however, had a different opinion. This looks like a Type G1, but it could still be a Type G2. Rusty was now even more confused, but Gwen quickly explained. The other type is similar, but it contains a stronger monster sealed inside a special chamber. Sibber remained silent and started walking forward as if he intended to explore the place alone. Astrella clearly disliked that idea and called out to him immediately. Hey, where are you going? We're supposed to be a trio. This isn't a solo mission. Just stay out of my way. The young man replied with a frown. However, just as he turned to leave, something unexpected happened. A pulse of energy burst from the active rift entrance. It felt like a sudden breeze brushed past everyone, and almost instantly, a strange shift began to occur. What's happening? Gwen raised her voice as she felt a chill run down her spine. Oh no, is the gate getting corrupted? We need to go back. Astrella shouted as she turned around, but it was already too late. The rift they had entered through began to glow red, then vanished completely. The blue veins on the walls started pulsing and changing color until they resembled living veins. Rusty could not understand what was happening, but he sensed that the monsters he had felt earlier were growing restless and moving their way. Get ready, Gwen. Monsters are coming. He stepped forward and positioned his metallic body to block the only entrance. He did not understand what had happened, but his mission was clear: protect his summoner. That was the purpose he would fulfill. No matter who appeared before him, he would not allow her to be harmed. That would be all of the groups. I should at least have an hour or two before the first one comes out, said the teacher while wiping his monocle with a soft cloth. The blue void gate hummed quietly before him, and now he only needed to wait for the students to return. For a moment, his gaze shifted to the side, and he saw a shadow approaching. Even without looking, he instantly knew who it was. The steps were slow and heavy. Quentin. The head of Class B1 turned his head and immediately regretted it. The tone of the man who called out to him was not cheerful but mocking. Harold, why are you coming over here? Don't you have something better to do, like chewing through the syllabus? Ho ho, good one. But I just wanted to have a chat with the head teacher of Class B1. Is that too much to ask? Are you still upset that you did worse than me on the last assessment? Harold was a rather heavy man, his belly bulging even through the loose robe he wore. Compared to Quentin, it was clear that he cared little about his appearance. His cheeks were round, and crumbs clung to his clothes as if he had just finished eating. You are as unkempt as ever. The heavier teacher laughed at Quentin's remark and didn't seem to care about the taunt. Oh, don't be like that, old friend. I just wanted to see how your promising students are doing. Word is, you've got that Rainstar girl in your class. She has become quite the topic among the faculty lately. Quentin gave a short sigh and turned his gaze back to the rift. You're not getting anything out of me. You'll see her at the inter-class competition. It was clear what Harold wanted, and Quentin had no intention of giving it to him. Through the recent seating duel, he had made his assessment and would not reveal his students' strengths. His rival, the head of Class B2, would gain no advantage from him. Have you figured it out? Well, not like it matters. You'll lose just like you did before. Right as Harold was about to continue babbling, something happened. The blue gate before them began to sizzle as bolts of black lightning crackled across its surface. Both teachers froze. The gentle hum that had come from the gate distorted into a piercing screech. The magic circles meant to stabilize it started to flicker and hiss violently. What in the world? Quentin muttered, stepping closer. His monocle gleamed as he activated an identification spell, but the reading that appeared made his heart skip a beat. Impossible. The gate has become corrupted. It is turning into a crimson gate. Quickly, we must stop it. I'll help. Even though Harold had been harsh toward his colleague, once the students were in danger, both teachers acted immediately. They drew their magical instruments. Quentin's had a smaller, gem-encrusted wand, while Harold's resembled a traditional wizard's staff with an orb embedded between the wooden branches. Both raised their staves in unison, their mana bursting so fiercely that the air distorted around them. The once stable chamber turned into a maelstrom of light as sigils burst to life beneath the void gate. We must reverse the flow. Get the students out before the corruption spreads. Harold said. I know. Quentin replied in an irritated tone. He thrust his wand forward. A dozen magic circles appeared around the gate, each filled with complex symbols meant to stabilize the dimensional flow. The black lightning reacted violently, lashing out like living tendrils and shattering one of the circles instantly. Harold gritted his teeth and slammed his staff into the ground, channeling all his mana into the spell. Soon, other teachers rushed into the chamber to help. The spell was working, and one by one, students began flying out of the gate. Get the students to safety. Quentin shouted as students began escaping. The gate had not yet turned fully red as it remained a deep purple. In this state, it could still be salvaged. Within moments, the void gate began spitting out the people who had gone through it. Some tumbled across the floor, dazed but alive. Their familiars appeared beside them, disoriented but unharmed. Maintain the inversion. Do not let the gate close yet. Another teacher shouted as they joined the effort. The black lightning intensified. The gate continued to eject more students, but its color deepened into a dark crimson glow. Then, with a burst of energy so powerful that it shoved even the teachers backward, the gate transformed completely. It's completely turned, said Harold as he attempted to get from the ground. Around them lay multiple students, most of them dazed and confused. Did everyone make it out safely? Quentin, on the other hand, was more concerned about his students. His gaze swept across the entire chamber. Within seconds, he ran several calculations in his mind and realized that one group was missing. Astrella Fjord, Gwendolyn Rainstar, and Sibber Tygrys are unaccounted for. They are still inside the corrupt gate. He clenched his fist around his wand and tried casting another spell on the gate, but it did not react. It now glowed a deep crimson and could no longer be accessed from this side. He understood that clearly. This is bad. He whispered to himself, knowing well what this meant. A low rumble echoed through the cavern. Dust drifted from the ceiling and scattered like ash while faint growls sounded from the shadows ahead. The soft blue glow that once illuminated the walls shifted and became a bright crimson. That's not supposed to happen. Astrella shouted as she turned toward the sound. Aerie, her summon, fluttered closer to her, and her face showed the same worry that her summoner felt. Gwen stood beside her and tightened her grip on her staff, the only weapon she had besides the beings she could call forth. Sibber, however, did not appear very alarmed and had yet to summon anything to protect them or himself. Get behind me. I'll take care of this. Rusty said as he raised his shield and lowered his halberd. The tunnel was narrow and not well suited for long weapons except for thrusting. By standing in the middle, he could block any monsters from slipping past him since one part of the passage was slightly narrower. Why did the gate close? What's happening? Gwen asked in a trembling voice. The gate they had entered through had vanished, leaving them with no way to escape. I read about this before. Did you see it turn red? Red, you mean the gate became corrupted, but that means... Before the two girls could continue their conversation, 3 monsters burst from around the corner. The crimson light spilling from the walls reflected off their leathery skin, revealing shapes far more menacing than the goblins the students were used to fighting. Hobgoblins! Astrella shouted as the creatures revealed themselves. Though similar to their smaller kin, there were many differences. Each one was at least a head taller than a regular goblin, and their arms were longer than a human's, ending in clawed hands that scraped against the stone floor as they moved. Their faces were a grotesque mix of human and beast, with flat noses, pointed ears, and yellow eyes that glowed faintly with malice. The first hobgoblin roared, its sharp teeth glistening with saliva as it raised a crude iron cleaver. Both girls flinched at the sound, but Rusty did not move. He held his shield steady and waited for the monsters to come closer. The leading hobgoblin charged forward with surprising speed, its cleaver dragging along the ground and striking sparks. Kuok! In less than a second, the monster's head was split apart by Rusty's quick thrust. Green blood splashed across the floor as the creature collapsed instantly. Even after seeing their companion cut down, the other two did not hesitate and charged straight at him. One leapt toward his shield while the other tried to grab his halberd before he could swing it. Suddenly, his weapon became a blur. He unleashed several rapid thrusts that pierced through the monster's limbs and torsos. They had no coordination or strategy, only blind aggression. They reminded him of ordinary dungeon beasts as they fell to the ground and died by his hand. Oh! At first, their bodies looked like regular flesh as green blood splattered in every direction, even across his armor. But after a few seconds, the corpses and gore began to shine with a bright red light before dissolving into tiny particles of mana that lingered briefly, then vanished. So, what about this red void gate? What makes it so special? What's this corrupt gate? When the fight was over, he turned to face the two girls. They looked startled by how quickly the battle had ended, but soon regained their composure. I almost forgot we have Rusty to protect us. With him, going through a red gate might actually be possible. Astrella said with a sigh. Gwen remained silent, speaking to Rusty through their link instead. A corrupt gate is when a regular gate becomes unstable. It closes from the other side and can't be accessed by others until it's cleared or until you reach the new gate exit. A new gate exit? Rusty asked. Gwen was about to answer when Astrella jabbed her in the side, making her yelp. Hey, what was that for? For leaving me out of the conversation. I know you're talking to Rusty through that connection of yours. What were you talking about? Astrella looked irritated at being excluded. Gwen took a breath and answered once she had composed herself. He just wanted to know what a corrupted gate was and how to clear it. Ha, that's easy. In this case, let this big sis answer that for you, Rusty. Astrella stepped closer and patted him on the back. Be big sis. Gwen repeated those words, confused by the choice, but she didn't interrupt as Astrella began her explanation. When a gate becomes corrupted, a new exit appears somewhere within it. Once we find that exit, we'll be able to get out. You can also create a new exit by defeating every monster inside, but since this is only a closed maze section of a corrupted gate, even if we kill them all, we still won't be able to leave. That's why we need to find the exit ourselves. Astrella sounded proud of her explanation, but she wasn't finished yet. I'm sure you're wondering where this exit could be. It's most likely near a large concentration of monsters or a single, much stronger one. Rusty stood there listening to the explanation, and it was all he needed to know. It reminded him of the dungeons from which he came from. Sometimes, large groups of monsters, traps, or a boss kept people from progressing further, and this place seemed to have similar systems, only in reverse. So, we just need to find this exit. Yes, Rusty, we just need to find the exit. Gwen replied in a way that her friend would understand, and this seemed to make Astrella happy. This is stupid. However, their team was not unified, as the third humanoid member shook his head in disappointment. Finally, Sibber decided to act. He reached out with his hand to materialize a summoning circle. From within, 2 creatures emerged, ones that Rusty recognized from the previous test. It looks like that lightning tiger. They are just smaller. Two beasts appeared that looked more or less like regular tigers, only slightly larger and with sharper fangs. Classification: Lesser Tundra Tiger E. Type: Beast. Description: A large tiger monster living in a cold climate, its fangs are enhanced by mana and as strong as steel. Despite their lesser rank, they're extremely fast and coordinated when fighting in pairs. Hey, where are you going? We are all in this together. Astrella looked furious and pointed her finger at Sibir as she shouted. I don't plan to babysit anyone. Just don't get in my way. It was clear that the young man had no intention of cooperating, and soon he was walking down the corridor. Rusty stepped aside to let him pass and wondered where the young man got his confidence from. The two tigers he had summoned were only E-rank creatures, the same rank as the hobgoblins. I think we should follow him. What if something happens to him? Gwen asked in a concerned tone, and Astrella responded with a slight pout on her face. Then it's going to be his own fault. Gwen felt more sympathy for their third-party member and started inching forward, unwilling to leave him behind. Let's just follow him. It's better if we stick together. Rusty's summoner continued to urge her friend to follow as Sibir was about to vanish into the corridor and leave them behind. Fine, but don't think he'll get any buffs from me. Eventually, the two girls agreed to follow their unfriendly companion. Rusty moved first and was followed by the two girls. Gwen managed to summon one iron armor to stand in the back. While she still had some mana left, it was better to keep some in reserve in case Rusty's form required mending. Soon, the group of three entered a larger chamber filled with more hobgoblins, and a fight broke out. As before, Rusty was their main fighting force. With Ares buffing magic, which seemed to have improved further, he became faster and stronger than before. While he took down three of the red monsters, Sibir's tigers managed to maul a fourth one while he stood there with his arms crossed. Where should we go? Once the battle was over, they found themselves at a juncture. Three paths stretched in different directions, and with no clear leader, they were unable to decide which one to take. Why are you going left? The right one is clearly the correct path. Grumbled Astrella as Sibir was already walking that way. I told you to stop bothering me. Just go right if you want. The young man replied with a shrug. He clearly wanted nothing to do with the group, but Gwen was unwilling to let them split up. Left doesn't look that bad. It's not like we really know where to go. Why don't we just mark our path with a spell? If we get lost, we can return here. Fine. Astrella looked to Eri, who nodded. Eri released something like sparkling dust, and soon a faint glowing trail appeared behind her. As the group moved left, the trail remained visible to anyone with mana sense. The group of youths pressed forward, with no end to the maze in sight and no idea what truly awaited them. Hey, watch out! A voice belonging to a young man echoed from afar, but it was already too late. Oops! Gwen responded as she looked down at the ground and saw a glowing symbol. Not again! Sibir, who had managed to stay composed, furrowed his brows even more than before. Gwen had stepped on one of the tiles, activating a trap that sent arrows flying in their direction. Airy shield! Astrella shouted as she ordered her fairy to create a protective barrier. Rusty lifted his shield and used his body to intercept the sharp arrows. Luckily, he was sturdy enough for them all to bounce off his frame. Sibir, who had walked ahead, was not so fortunate. Some of his beasts were hit, and he was forced to dodge the attack as he kept running. Just leave me alone! He shouted as he reached the end of the trapped corridor. Gwen, unwilling to let the group split up, called back. No, we must stay together. This would not have happened if you had stayed with us and stopped moving ahead, said Astrella while laughing at Sibir's schematics. Thanks to Eri and Rusty, there was no danger from the traps, but their classmate did not see it that way. Sibir ignored her and stormed ahead through the winding tunnels. The sound of his boots echoed off the stone walls. His two tigers stalked behind him, their tails flicking as particles of mana drifted from the areas they had been struck. Wait! Don't just, ugh! Astrella groaned and clutched her staff tighter. Why does every group project have to have that one guy? Can't we just go in the opposite direction, Gwen? If he wants to get himself killed that badly, just let him. Rusty looked into the distance and rested his halberd to the side. They had been moving through the tunnels for a while, chasing after the young man. He seemed determined to get away from the group, though Rusty did not understand why. It did not seem that Sibir was suicidal, and in some way it felt as though he was hiding his true abilities. I don't see a reason to cooperate with someone like that. He might get you hurt, Gwen. Not you too, Rusty? It's better if we all work together. Astrella rolled her eyes, and Rusty stepped forward. With the trap already triggered, there was no danger ahead, yet he remained curious about what the young man was concealing. I didn't know you were such a softie, Gwen. But fine. The narrow tunnels twisted endlessly, and Sibber's irritation only grew. Each step echoed sharply against the walls. The light from the crimson veins crawling along the rock pulsed steadily. His tigers padded silently beside him, their wounds mending as he shared a portion of his mana with them. Still no exit. He muttered under his breath and turned another corner, only to halt abruptly when the corridor ended. An uneven wall of stone blocked the way, covered in more glowing veins. There was no exit in sight and no branching path, only an empty chamber. TCH. Sibber clicked his tongue and stepped forward. His tigers sniffed the air, searching for a hidden passage, and he did the same. Often in such cases, a secret path would appear, yet nothing revealed itself this time. A dead end? Did I make a mistake? He spoke quietly to himself and was about to turn back when he felt the mana in the area shift. What? The chamber began to rumble. At first, he expected arrows to shoot from the sides, but none came. Instead, a deep grinding sound echoed from above. When he looked up, his blood ran cold as the ceiling began to descend. Damn it! He spun around and tried to run, but the ground shook violently beneath his feet. It was another trap within a trap. The ceiling continued to fall while the trembling floor made it nearly impossible to keep his balance. Each step forward grew harder, and the situation turned desperate. Just as all hope seemed lost, a suit of armor charged out from the corridor from which he had previously come. Move, you fool! Astrella's voice rang out, and Gwen shouted as well. You need to run! The two cried out just as the ceiling came crashing down, but instead of being crushed, Sibber found himself still breathing. To his shock, Rusty stood beneath the falling stone with both hands raised high, holding the ceiling like some kind of steel pillar. Gwen, I won't be able to hold it for long. Even surrounded by his twilight haze and reinforced by skills such as fortify armor, Rusty could feel his joints waning. Sibber did not have much time to escape, and it seemed he had finally chosen to reveal a glimpse of his true power. Gritting his teeth, Sibber glanced at one of his tigers. With a quick command, the creature charged forward and burst into orange particles of mana that gathered around his legs. The energy surged through him, and his limbs grew stronger, faster, and bulkier. With his agility heightened, he launched himself forward, moving with a speed that could not be underestimated. Rusty kept his stance steady as Sibber shot past him like a blur. The newly enhanced youth rushed ahead and tumbled into the corridor. Once he was safely inside, Rusty stepped back and allowed the trap to continue its descent. It slammed down with great force, crushing the summoned creature that had been left behind almost instantly. Are you all right? Gwen yelled over the rumbling and the cloud of dust that burst from the now closed entrance. Sibber coughed slightly but nodded. Rusty, however, looked down at his joints and saw that one of his knees and one of his elbows were in bad shape. If it had been a second or two longer, he would have been crushed along with the tiger. You saved me. Sibber spoke flatly, his tone missing its usual sharpness. Rusty tilted his head as he looked at the young man's legs. Though his pants had not torn, they had ridden up enough to expose his ankles. He could sense that more mana was flowing through them, but he also noticed something else. Tiger stripes had appeared on Sibber's legs, showing that he had taken on a new, more animalistic form. Is that summon fusion? Astrella narrowed her eyes as she noticed the change as well. Sibber seemed uncomfortable under her gaze, and now that he was safe, he released the spell he had cast earlier. The tiger that had fused with him reappeared beside him, and his legs returned to their normal shape. He seemed ashamed of what he had done and quickly pulled his pants back into place to cover the fading stripes. Gwen, what's summon fusion? Rusty was, of course, interested in this phenomenon since he had never seen anything like it before. Some summoners can bond directly with their summons and familiars. Gwen spoke out loud this time as she explained it to Rusty, but she trailed off at the end and looked instead at Astrella, who was approaching Sibber. It seemed that the part fairy had realized something that only she could truly understand. Is this what you were trying to hide and why you were avoiding us? She asked as Sibber stood up and brushed the dust from his clothes. What? Are you going to laugh too? Rusty tilted his head at the question, unsure what was happening. The technique that had been used seemed quite powerful, giving Sibur an agility boost equal to that of a D-rank monster. To Rusty, who cared mostly about becoming stronger, this made little sense. If he had such a technique, he would use it proudly. But for these humanoids, there seemed to be a heavy social cost tied to such a transformation. Ha, why would I laugh, you idiot? You don't think that I don't know how it is for ones like us? Astrella replied and moved her green hair aside to reveal her ears, which were different from those of humans. At last, Rusty understood what this was about. The people at this school cared deeply about the purity of both their lineage and their race. It seemed Sibur was ashamed of showing his transformed self because of that. This explained why he relied on his two weaker summons even though he was far stronger when using this strange fusion technique. Once Sibur looked more closely at Astrella's ears, he lowered his gaze. Gwen stepped closer, her expression softening as she saw her friend speaking with Sibur, but this was not the time for a heartfelt conversation. They were still inside a dangerous, corrupted void, and Rusty noticed that some creatures were approaching. Gwen, mend my joints, some creatures are coming. Rusty says that monsters are coming. Rusty moved forward to intercept two incoming hobgoblins. As before, his halberd pierced through them, but more of them appeared. To his surprise, someone appeared beside him, Sibur. Without speaking, the young man summoned both of his tigers again, and this time he used them together. For a moment, Rusty paused as the young man seemed to have finally made up his mind. With a wave of his hand, Sibur drew the mana from both of his creatures into himself, and his transformation began to take shape. So this is summon fusion, does this mean you and I can fuse, Gwen? I'm not so sure about that. For a moment, Rusty imagined fusing with Gwen, but he was not certain it would make him stronger. His summoner was not made for battle, and he feared such a fusion might only weaken him. In this case, however, it was clearly different as Sibur's aura soared and his body changed even more while he used multiple summons. Sibur's body became shrouded in pale orange light as the mana from his tigers merged into him completely. His golden eyes began to glow as a transformation took form. Stripes appeared on his face, and his fangs grew longer. His frame expanded, and his fingernails turned into sharp claws. When Sibur finally spoke, his voice was deeper and his words carried a faint growl. Stay behind me. Without waiting for a reply, he shot forward faster than Rusty had ever seen him move. A hobgoblin lunged, but Sibur's clawed hand tore through its chest before the creature could raise its weapon. The two girls were stunned as they watched their companion tear through the approaching monsters. He's around the level of that person. Rusty tried to gauge Sibur's true battle prowess. He was reminded of the man he had faced during the D-rank adventurer test and thought this young man was around that level, clearly much stronger than others expected him to be. In less than a minute the fight was over, and Rusty found himself with little to do. The small monster attack subsided, but the ordeal was not yet finished. He's strong, said Gwen. Yes, but a bit of a knucklehead, Astrella whispered, though her comment did not go unnoticed. I've heard that. Sibur looked at her with a mean expression. In this form his features appeared somewhat animalistic, yet he still looked mostly humanoid with small patches of fur on his forearms. How about we go back and try one of the other paths? Gwen stepped in to refocus the group on the real issue. I agree. This time their third companion did not complain and even waited for them to get closer. I'll stay in front. Use that summon of yours to kill any monsters that manage to get through, he said with a low growl before turning away, but before he could leave, Astrella interrupted. Wait a moment. What? He turned around with furrowed eyebrows. Gwen watched with a concerned look as Astrella moved closer, and without any further words, Aerie used her magic to give Sibur a few buffing spells. If you're going to be the vanguard, you're going to need these. The exchange between the two was awkward, but the earlier animosity had disappeared. For a moment, silence settled over the group as Aerie finished casting her spells on their new vanguard, who now seemed willing to cooperate. Once that was done, the group decided to retrace their steps to the juncture and try another path. They had not been inside for long, as only an hour had passed, but clearing the void gate was best done quickly. The longer they stayed, the greater the danger became. Without food or drink, their stamina would drop, and eventually they would collapse from exhaustion. Gwen was the least physically gifted among them, and after another hour of exploring, her legs began to tremble. Even so, the group continued their exploration. With all three working together, the monsters were not that dangerous. Eri used her spells to strengthen, heal, and restore stamina. Rusty and Sibber fought the monsters that attacked them and cut them down with ease. After passing through all 3 tunnels, the group finally arrived at another chamber. "How long have we been here?" asked Gwen as she sat down on a nearby rock. Her face was paler than usual, but she refused to give in. "Close to 4 hours now. This should be the last one," replied Astrella, who was also tired. "There is something inside. The mana density is the strongest here." Even Sibber had become more talkative. The group that had been split had somehow managed to make it this far, but their struggles were not yet over, as one more hurdle remained. "I think something strong is in there. Get ready, Gwen. This is probably the boss chamber you mentioned. Rusty senses something strong inside. We should rest before going in," Gwen said to the others, and they nodded. Everyone took out their remaining support items, the most important being the mana and health recovery potions. They only had 2 left. One was given to Sibber, who drained his mana reserves quickly in his fused form, and the second ended up in Astrella's hand. Eri's buffs and healing also consumed a great deal of mana, leaving Gwen with the highest amount of MP among them as the only one without a potion. "We'll use the same formation as before. Just use your summon." Before Sibber could finish, Astrella interrupted him. "He isn't a summon. His name is Rusty. Remember it." The young man looked at Rusty awkwardly, then returned to speaking. "Then use. Tell Rusty to defend. Considering how weak these hobgoblins were, the last boss shouldn't be that tough." The group nodded, and after restoring their mana, they moved forward. Sibber summoned both his tigers again and prepared to fuse once more. Rusty stepped ahead, pushed the heavy door of the boss chamber, and slowly, the group ventured into the unknown. "This is a lot bigger than I expected," Rusty thought to himself as he stepped into the so-called boss chamber. It looked nothing like the other spaces in this void gate, yet it still reminded him of the dungeons in his world. The structures were similar, and the traps and swarms of monsters gave him the same feeling. There were slight differences since they could not retrace their steps to find an exit. Instead, they were forced to search for an exit gate that would appear somewhere within the chamber. "I don't see anything resembling an exit gate, Gwen. Are you sure we are in the right place?" he called out to his summoner while she looked across the large cavern. The ceiling vanished into the darkness above, and the walls were lined with many more pulsating red crystals than the other tunnels, which made the entire place glow brightly. He lacked a sense of smell, yet he could still tell from the reactions of his allies that the air was stale. The mana was thick and pooled in several places, which suggested the presence of hidden traps. "Are you sure, Rusty? Could there be any doors or openings? Now that you mention it, there is a large gate behind that thing." That thing is a... Oh no!" Gwen hesitated to step any farther once she heard Rusty speak. Her eyes followed the line of his halberd to a lone creature. It sat in a chair with its legs spread, its pointed chin resting on its hand as it watched their movements. "That should be the boss, right? Let us see." Classification: Red Hobgoblin Knight D. Type: Humanoid. Description: Hobgoblin Knights are the elite warriors of Hobgoblin tribes, creatures bred and trained for war. Larger and far more intelligent than ordinary hobgoblins, they stand nearly as tall as an orc and possess the discipline of true soldiers. Their crimson skin and ember-like eyes result from prolonged exposure to corrupted mana, which strengthens their bodies while gradually wearing down their minds. Armed in scavenged plate armor and carrying brutal weapons, a Hobgoblin Knight serves as both commander and servant for much stronger Hobgoblin lords. When no such leader is present, it assumes the role of a temporary ruler until it finds a master worthy to serve. Just as the description had stated, their next opponent was a heavily armored monster. It wore a full suit of armor, yet several pieces did not match, as if the set had been salvaged during battle rather than crafted by a blacksmith to fit the creature's strange frame. Like the other hobgoblins, its arms were unusually long, but now that this monster was taller, the proportions did not appear as mismatched as they did on the regular hobgoblins. "Why would it be a Hobgoblin Knight?" Gwen commented while she and Astrella looked afraid. Rusty examined the monster's description and saw that it was a regular D-rank creature, one that was technically above his own rank. For these young summoners, monsters at this level were quite dangerous, but to him it was simply another chance to test his steel. "Do not worry, Gwen. Leave it to me." Rusty, wait." The armored creature had already begun to rise from its stone seat. The red hobgoblin knight stood slowly, metal scraping against metal. Its helmet was crude and dented. It covered most of its head but left the creature's crooked jaw exposed, which allowed them to see the monster's unsettling grin. We should not underestimate it. Let Aerie give you a few buffs first. As Astrella instructed Aerie to raise Rusty's stats, Sibber summoned both of his tigers and watched the creature carefully. The young man swallowed hard, clearly intimidated by the dense mana that surrounded the monster. Even so, he seemed to have a plan of his own and called out to the other two girls. Keep it busy. I will circle around and strike when I see an opening. He stepped to the side with both of his summoned tigers trotting close behind him. The two girls nodded, since the idea sounded reasonable. One iron living armor remained behind to protect both Gwen and Astrella. Rusty advanced with long, confident strides, shield in his left hand and halberd in his right. His opponent did the same, and the two mirrored each other. The red hobgoblin knight carried a spiked rectangular shield with dried blood staining its surface. In its right hand, it held a poleaxe that matched the length of Rusty's weapon, though not its quality. The blade was chipped in several places and looked as if it could break during a prolonged fight. The battle began immediately. Rusty charged forward with his shield raised and his halberd thrusting out just as it had many times before against the other hobgoblins. The difference between this monster and the others became clear. Even though it wore heavy armor, its movements were far more refined. Where Rusty had previously disemboweled his opponents with ease, this time his strikes either missed or were blocked by the creature's shield. Sparks flew in every direction as the two armored beings clashed. The crystals along the cavern walls trembled with each impact. Rusty drove his halberd forward once more, this time dipping low and angling for the knight's exposed side. The red hobgoblin knight twisted with uncanny dexterity. Its poleaxe swept downward and intercepted Rusty's weapon, forcing him back a step. The shock rattled through his metallic joints as he caught himself before he could fall. Strong, probably stronger than that adventurer. The knight suddenly surged forward. Its shield slammed into Rusty with brutal force. The living armor dug his boots into the stone, carving deep grooves as he was pushed backward. Rusty! Gwen cried out when she saw her summoned monster being forced back, but Rusty did not seem bothered. I am fine, more than fine, this is fun. He called back with a tone that sounded more amused than bothered. What? What is wrong, Gwen? Is Rusty in trouble? Astrella asked as she watched their strongest fighter being overwhelmed. No, he is having fun. Fun. The green-haired girl stared as Rusty rose again, surrounded by a faint haze of grey energy. He pushed off the ground with a rapid step. The hobgoblin knight braced for impact, and their shields crashed together, but this time the red creature was the one sent skipping back several paces. Now the true excitement was beginning. It was a battle between two armored beings, metal against metal. This was what Rusty had been waiting for. It was a challenge he could learn from, something to break the monotony of the Mistwood Academy dorms. Sparks were starting to fly once more, and the hobgoblin was preparing to leap at him in a fit of rage. However, an interruption appeared in the form of someone leaping into the fray. Wait! Rusty tried to call out to the figure approaching from the back. It was Sibber, already fused with both his tigers. His claws glowed orange as he activated a skill. The knight was focused entirely on Rusty, so the surprise attack landed cleanly. 4 long gashes tore through the armor and drew blood despite its heavy protection. Now! Sibber shouted as the creature staggered and turned its attention toward him. Rusty felt some disappointment at the interruption of his duel, but if he failed to act, the young man would be in danger. The wound Sibber inflicted was not deep, and the monster was already shifting its focus toward the newcomer. Rusty hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then his halberd shot forward and sank into the monster's side just as it tried to turn. The blade punched through the damaged section of armor and drove in deep. A low shriek rumbled beneath the knight's helm as its knees buckled. Sibber did not wait. He lunged forward and delivered a flurry of slashes with his glowing claws. The red hobgoblin knight staggered back, its poleaxe scraping across the floor. It dropped to one knee and its head dipped. A moment later, the helmet slid off and clattered across the stone. Silence followed within the enclosed chamber. For an instant, it appeared that the battle had ended, but just as Rusty moved in to finish the fight, a massive roar tore from the monster's throat. Ah! Sibber was closest and stumbled away as he clamped his hands over his ears. The roar struck like a spell and nearly shattered his eardrums. Kia! Gwen and Astrella recoiled in pain as the sound wave rolled through the chamber. Aerie raised her shield to protect them, and then they all saw it happen. Cracks spread along the cavern walls, and pieces of stone fell away, revealing glowing eyes within the gaps. Monsters in the walls! Astrella shouted as she pointed. The clusters of mana Rusty had noticed earlier revealed themselves to be hiding places for monsters. They awakened in response to the Hobgoblin Knight's roar. The first pair of eyes slid free of the stone like embers and was quickly followed by another. From all sides, the knight's minions emerged, more hobgoblins like the ones they had faced inside the corridors. These creatures were smaller than their leader but far more numerous. They wore mismatched steel armor and carried rusted weapons. Chipped cleavers, scavenged short swords, and even spears filled their hands. There are so many of them. Sibur, still reeling from the roar, twisted to look at the groups surrounding them. He could not make an exact count, but it seemed there were around 20 additional enemies in the room, and all of them were ready to attack. To make matters worse, the night was not finished. Sibur, watch out! Astrella shouted the warning, but it came too late. Sibur turned his head and saw a shield heading toward him. What? He covered his face, but the blow still sent him flying. The monster that had been on its knees had revived. Its wounds had healed, and its amber eyes had turned crimson with fury. Luckily, Sibur was not alone. As the monster pounced, Rusty was there to save him. With a shoulder tackle, Rusty sent the enraged red hobgoblin tumbling aside and engaged it in battle. The creature had used some kind of ability to restore itself, yet the drawbacks were clear. Its expression was twisted with pure rage, and there was no intelligence left in its eyes. It hurled itself at the first thing it saw without any sense or strategy. Gwen, stop spacing out. Protect yourselves like we discussed earlier. All right. Rusty shouted to his summoner as he pushed the boss monster away. The creature had gained more power through its transformation, but now it lacked coordination. It was slightly harder to handle, yet still manageable. The real danger came from the minions that had begun to swarm in. Before Rusty could land another blow on the knight, two smaller monsters rushed him and forced him back. Gwen finally nodded and turned to her friend. Before they entered this place, they had talked through a few possible scenarios, and this was one of them. Astrella, we need a shield. On it. Aerie was summoned to protect the two weakest members of the group. Sibur leaped back toward the girls and positioned himself as their main line of defense. The monsters closed in and swung their weapons at him, but they were still only E-rank creatures, and he could handle them. A clash between the two groups erupted. Steel rang against stone. Claws scraped across armor, and the once silent chamber dissolved into chaos. Rusty blocked a spear thrust with his shield, then drove his halberd into the creature's neck to finish it. As he tried to pull the weapon free, two hobgoblins grabbed the shaft and held it in place. This is annoying. The knight swung his poleaxe in a wide arc, forcing Rusty to abandon his main weapon. He reached into his smaller stash, pulled out the mace he had stored there, and crushed another monster's skull with a single blow. The number of enemies was slowly decreasing, but the magic reserves of his companions were shrinking just as quickly. Sibur is capable, but he will not last more than a few minutes, and neither will Aerie. I need to do something. Rusty leapt back as the defeated creature fell, and the enraged hobgoblin knight rushed in to replace it. It chased him relentlessly and even managed to strike him a few times, carving deep gashes into his armored frame. As he jumped away again, something caught his attention, something that could help. The monsters that had been turning into red mana particles were reacting differently. Their bodies still dissolved, yet something remained this time. Bits of armor and discarded weapons littered the floor. Is it because this is a boss chamber? Rusty did not know the cause, but the chamber was now filled with usable equipment. He realized he could take advantage of it. His mana bar was separate from Gwen's. While she could no longer summon more helpers, he still had the potential to call upon another of his own. As soon as he created enough distance, he stretched out his hand toward the scattered armor pieces and activated his puppet armor skill. The effect was immediate. Pauldrons, breastplates, and stray fragments of metal scraped across the stone as the skill pulled them together. They assembled into a crude suit of living armor. It staggered at first due to poor balance, but it was still strong enough to fight or at least hold back the remaining hobgoblins while Rusty faced the main boss. Are you doing that, Gwen? Astrella asked as she took a sip from the only mana bottle she carried. Two hobgoblins were pounding on her shield, forcing her to spend more mana than she wanted. No, that is not me. Gwen replied. As she spoke, she saw a suit of armor take shape from 3 pieces of discarded hobgoblin gear. It turned toward them and began to move. At first, it lumbered slowly in their direction, but with each step, it seemed to grow faster and stronger. Within moments, it was charging, a spear in its hand, and it drove the weapon deep into the neck of one of the hobgoblins attacking their shield. Ack! Gwen recoiled in fright as hobgoblin blood sprayed across the blue barrier. Even so, she forced herself to keep watching. The fight was far from over, but the momentum was shifting. Each hobgoblin that fell seemed to empower their forces. She knew Rusty was responsible. For every 3 monsters slain, a new puppet armor appeared, and soon the tide began to turn in their favor. From the 20 combatants who had entered the chamber, only 5 remained, including the Knight Hobgoblin. 3 more living armors now stood among them, fighting, stabbing, and firing arrows at the E-rank monsters. Their leader looked grim, the red light in its eyes fading as a mace came down on its jaw, quickly bringing this battle to an end. Ack! I can't get used to this. Gwen looked away as the red hobgoblin knight bent backward with its jaw hanging loose. The crimson fury burning in its eyes flickered and then faded as if someone had snuffed out a fire. It wobbled on unsteady legs, and the poleaxe slipped from its fingers. The weapon clanged against the stone floor and rolled away. Rusty stepped forward without hesitation and grabbed the fallen poleaxe. He examined it for a moment and realized it was not inferior to his halberd. Without speaking, he swung it in a clean arc to decapitate the monster, but stopped himself just before the blade touched the creature's neck. Ah! I almost forgot again. His 3 companions stared in confusion as Rusty abruptly stepped back, seized the monster with both hands, and held it in place. What is he doing, Gwen? Asked Astrella, while Gwen just shrugged. I don't know. The one remaining puppet armor removed Rusty's helmet and set it on the hobgoblin knight's head. Rusty waited for the prompt to appear and, to his surprise, it finally did. Compatible skills have been found. Please choose a skill you want to learn. He had not used his skill absorption ability much lately, since each use lengthened its cooldown. There had also been a few worthwhile options. This time, he had 2 choices, and one of them was promising. Parrying. Passive skill. Allows the user to read the flow of combat with greater clarity, making parried attacks easier and more effective. Shield Bulwark. Active skill. Increases the durability and resistance of the user's shield, allowing it to withstand incoming attacks. The choice was obvious. The shield skill was tempting, but greater durability was not something he urgently needed. Parrying, however, would let him deflect blows with his weapon and create openings for counterattacks. It was also a skill he could use no matter what weapon he held. After selecting the skill, the same thing happened as before. The person he was absorbing the skill from began to twitch. The monster tried to thrash around, and the sudden movement nearly sent Gwen falling onto her posterior when the hobgoblin jerked violently. Rusty held it down with all his strength and only released it once the process ended. When he finished, he picked up his helmet and continued with the execution. What were you doing, Rusty? Gwen asked him just as he raised the poleaxe up high. Oh, I just absorbed one of its skills. You can do that? She was clearly surprised by that revelation, but had no time to dwell on it as he brought the weapon down to lop off the monster's head. Gwen flinched at the sight, though she seemed to be growing accustomed to the carnage, at least to some extent. I wish I could get experience here too. He muttered under his breath as the monster's head fell and its body slumped forward. Like the other hobgoblins, it dissolved into thousands of tiny motes of mana, leaving its armor and weapon behind. This time, however, something else remained. A red gemstone rested among the remnants, and the 3 summoners were already eyeing it with interest. It is a big one. Astrella remarked as she, Gwen, and even Sibber stared at the gleaming gem. It clearly radiated a great amount of mana, though its purpose was unknown to Rusty. This time, there was no need to ask since he could simply use his identification skill. Classification. Red Void Crystal D. Type. Mineral. Description. A rare crystal found in a corrupted void gate. It can be used by craftsmen to create or enhance magical equipment. When refined properly, it produces a dense mana core capable of strengthening a weapon, armor piece, or summoning catalyst. Due to its unstable nature, improper handling may cause minor mana backlash. Rusty finished reading the description just as Gwen knelt beside the glowing crystal. Its red light reflected against her eyes, and for a moment, she completely forgot her fear. It's warm. Don't touch it too long. Astrella warned, tapping Gwen's hand away gently. Remember, this is a red void crystal. It will corrupt your mana if you hold it for too long. It needs to be processed first. So let's put it away for now and get out of here. While the girls inspected the spoils of battle, Sibur was the only one who turned away to focus on something moving. The large gate behind the Hobgoblin Knight's throne began to shift, and a deep crimson glow appeared from within. That must be the exit. Rusty said as he noticed the mana flowing out of the next area. It seemed everything was finally over, and all that remained was to gather their things and leave. He was not ready to go just yet, since there were still a few valuables worth taking. One was the poleaxe he held, and the other was the set of armor parts left behind by the hobgoblin. Careful now, Gwen said as she placed the glowing gem into her spatial bag. Neither of the other two summoners objected. To them, Rusty had contributed the most in this void gate, so his summoner was the rightful one to claim the spoils. Even so, Gwen had no intention of keeping everything for herself. How about we turn in this void gem for academy credit and divide them equally? Astrella lit up and hugged her friend. I knew you were the best, Gwen. Sibur only shrugged. It is yours. Do what you want with it. You do not need to be shy, Sibur. I know you are happy too. Astrella said with a smile. Sibur turned his head away. His form had already begun to shrink as his mana ran dry, and it looked as if the two girls were seeing him differently now. Wait, are you blushing? Sibur shook his head at the accusation and turned his whole body away so Astrella could not see his face. I am not. Sure you are. You are not as bad as you pretend to be. You just need to relax a little. Leave me alone. While Astrella continued teasing Sibur, Rusty got to work. He picked out the pieces of armor that could be salvaged, but he faced a problem. Normally, he would use his own storage system, yet here his soul forge abilities were limited. Gwen, could you take these armor pieces with you? These? Why? So I can use them to summon more helpers. The same way as before. Gwen understood immediately. She had already seen him use his puppet armor skill to create living armor servants, so she knew exactly what he intended. Although they were done with this place, the competition with the other B class was coming up soon. Rusty was almost certain that it would be the main mission, so it was best to prepare as much as possible. Astrella, I do not think he likes that. Also, could you help me? Gwen asked as she watched her friend chase Sibur around the boss chamber, trying to catch a glimpse of his face. Help you with what? Astrella glanced over just as Gwen stuffed a heavy pauldron into her spatial bag. With this. Rusty says he can use it to make more helpers next time, but my bag is almost full. Oh, sure. My bag is large and spacious. And you can help as well. She said as she grabbed Sibur's arm and pulled him closer. The young man could have resisted, but he let himself be dragged along. Soon, the group was packing up the armor pieces together, and Sibur agreed to lend them his spatial bag so they could store everything until they returned to the dorm storage. There, that is all the usable pieces. Now how about we get out of here? Gwen said as she looked toward the open gate and the glow coming from it. Yes, I have had enough of this place. I just want to go back and have a bath. Astrella replied. She glanced at Sibur and added another comment. You cannot join, though. The young man was clearly puzzled by the way Astrella treated him, but he could do nothing except roll his eyes and move forward first. Gwen shook her head and followed after Sibur. No treasure, disappointing. What greeted them was another red portal in an empty room. Rusty was disappointed, but at least they were not leaving empty-handed. He waited for the three summoners to step through the gate, then followed right after. The sensation of passing through the gate was the same as before, and soon he and the rest of his group were back in Mistwood Academy, much to the surprise of many. The students have returned. A voice echoed from nearby. It belonged to a familiar face, the teacher with the monocle who had sent them off on this test. He was not alone. A rather rotund individual stood beside him, his staff still crackling with traces of fading mana. Both men were clearly stunned by the sudden appearance of the three students who had gone missing. They were not the only ones present, as many other teachers surrounded the entire gate while preparing some kind of ritual. They seemed kind of on edge. Rusty noticed at once that something was wrong. Instead of rushing forward to check on Gwen and the others, the mages kept their distance. The chamber around them had also changed. The gate they had emerged from was now encircled by a ring of metal covered in strange symbols. The gate stood at the center of this structure, and it clearly served some purpose. We cannot be sure. What if they are voidlings? Bring out the measuring devices at once. The rotund mage shouted the order, and several assistants hurried into place. They dragged metallic frames and crystalline rods edged with detection glyphs. What is a voidling? Rusty asked as he watched the devices being pointed at Gwen and the two other youths. None of the three looked panicked. In fact, they seemed to expect this treatment. People who spend too much time inside a corrupt void gate sometimes return possessed by strange creatures. We call them voidlings. Possessed? Where do these creatures come from, and what do they want? He grew even more curious, but before Gwen could continue her explanation, the teachers spoke up. There is no sign of possession or corruption. They appear perfectly fine. They must have cleared the gate on their own. The chubby professor said this, but there was a strange look in his eyes, as though he was not pleased by the conclusion. Step aside, Harold. These are my students, not yours. Their own teacher finally moved forward and pushed the others away. His suit was immaculate as always, and the monocle over his eye glimmered as he performed his inspection. Gwendolyn Rainstar, explain what happened inside that gate. Well. Gwendolyn stepped ahead of the others. She swallowed hard and began to recount everything that had happened. She described the gate closing behind them and continued all the way to their encounter with the Hobgoblin Knight, at which point their teacher interrupted. You managed to defeat such a monster. Why yes, we did it together. The man was clearly surprised by their achievement but quickly recovered and nodded. Well done, you've managed to achieve something extraordinary. Go to the infirmary first before returning to your dorms. It seemed that the people around them were finally beginning to relax, although some tension still remained. Quentin's gaze lingered on the Crimson Gate, which began to shift in color after Rusty's group passed through it. Moments later, it appeared to be an ordinary blue gate, as if the entire predicament had never occurred. Their group was escorted out by several faculty members and guided to the infirmary, where the Academy's healers worked. There, they would be thoroughly examined for any traces of corruption and released once everything was confirmed to be safe. Oh! Oh! I suppose there is no use for me here any longer. Once the students had departed, a new figure appeared. It was an old man with a long white beard, someone to whom everyone in the chamber bowed with respect. Senior Raymeradmus, it seems the students managed to clear the gate, and we will not need to break through after all, said Quentin, the teacher of Class B1, before the older man could ask. Raymeradmus nodded, and for a moment his eyes followed the three departing students. His attention lingered on the smallest among them, Gwendolyn, and the little living armor creature perched on her shoulder. Her again. Very interesting. He spoke quietly to himself, which prompted Quentin to ask. What was that, Senior? Oh, nothing. Just an old man mumbling. Think nothing of it. Now then, if I am no longer needed, I shall take my leave. The old man didn't stay for too long and quickly vanished as if he had never been there in the first place. One moment, Senior Raymeradmus stood among them, the next, only a faint ripple of mana remained where his figure had been. Disperse the formation. Quentin let out a slow breath. We will not need the ritual. Record this incident, file the report, and ensure the gate is monitored until it gets thoroughly examined. The mages scrambled to obey, though many still glanced nervously at the now pacified void gate. Quentin himself stared at it for a long moment, his lips tightening ever so slightly. A corrupted gate within the Academy. Something clearly isn't right. Do we have a spy? The man contemplated for a moment before turning around. For the time being, there was nothing more that he could do but wait. Meanwhile, Gwen and the others followed a healer through a long corridor that smelled faintly of herbs and mana-infused liquids. They had spent nearly 5 hours inside the void gate, and a dull ache was settling into their limbs. They were not injured, but once the tension and adrenaline faded, exhaustion began to take over. Do you think they will keep us long? I feel so tired. Astrella's eyelids drooped as Aerie fanned her face with her fairy wings in an attempt to keep her awake. I hope not. I am getting hungry. Gwen's stomach rumbled, and Sibber's did as well, just as they reached a junction. The boy follows me. You girls go that way. The faculty member pointed toward a branching corridor. The group split, and Sibber gave Gwen and Astrella a weary look as he headed to the right. Do not let them poke you too many times. Astrella called after him with a grin. Sibber raised a hand in tired acknowledgement before disappearing around the corner. Their adventure in the Void Gate had finally come to an end as the girls continued toward another section of the infirmary. Rusty's mission, however, was far from finished. The competition between the classes still lay ahead, and he intended to earn the best score possible. Rusty? Are you in there? Gwen's voice echoed through the larger section of her dorm room. She looked under one of the tables, then into one of the closets, and for a moment, concern appeared on her face. Soon, however, the voice of her summons sounded inside her head. I'm in here. Rusty spoke from the adjoining room, and Gwen hurried inside to find him. Relief softened her expression when she saw him merely playing with her toothbrush. I hope you didn't use that. No, but it must be quite inefficient to scrub your bodies with these things. Rusty replied in a somewhat bored tone. Almost a week had passed since he was summoned, and he had grown tired of being confined to the dorm. Back where he came from, he could always find something to do. He could craft in the smithy or go hunting in the dungeon or forest. Here, on the other hand, he was forced to wait 8 hours until Gwen woke up and took him to classes. At first, he thought it would be interesting and enjoyable, but after the Void Gate incident, students had been forbidden from taking dangerous missions. This left them with little to do. Gwen spent most of her time reading, training her mana meditation, and wandering the corridors, but without combat, it all felt dull. Luckily, they were not short of credits, as after selling the Void Crystal, they had enough to last them for a whole month. If you don't brush your teeth, they go rotten, it's just how things are. Gwen chuckled while taking the toothbrush out of Rusty's small hand. Similar to corrosion, I went through that when I was younger. Rusty replied, remembering his first form. Gwen nodded in amusement, but then her tone became a bit more serious. We should probably go early today. The inter-class competition is today. She lowered her head again, her confidence clearly wavering. While his summoner had become braver, she still had a long way to go. Luckily, there was a second person in this dorm who seemed to know how to cheer her up. I hope we do well. Ack. Just as Gwen started to lose herself in thought, someone jabbed a finger into her side. What's with that defeated tone? Of course, we'll do well. Not only that, we will win and probably break a record. It was Astrella, with Eri perched on her shoulder. Rusty could tell this competition was likely the most important part of his mission, and he needed to focus on it if he wanted to make the most of his time here. It should end after this, so this might be my last day here for a while. Rusty knew how the summoning chamber worked. Once the mission was complete, he would be sent back to his soul forge. From there, he would create new frames and return to Gleam to continue his slow grind toward his next evolution. Considering how much time it always took, it would be months, perhaps even half a year, before he saw her again. While he found this place boring, he still appreciated her company, and it was clear she had grown attached to him. Sure, a new record. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Gwen spoke as she picked Rusty up from the ground while he attempted to move past her on his own 2 feet. He found himself being carried around like a toy by his summoner, and though he could do little about it, the treatment was becoming tiresome. Ever since the Void Gate incident, Gwen had been clinging to him like a child. She refused to let him out of her sight, as if she believed he might vanish at any moment. Each morning when she woke, she searched the room for him. After the first time he escaped into the central area, she had looked panic-stricken, as though she truly believed he was gone. From what he understood, she was afraid of becoming powerless again. The few living armor she could use were not enough to place her in B class, since D-rank monsters were something people in this class were either capable of summoning or close to being able to. Even so, he could improve her capabilities by earning summoner points after his return, ensuring she would not be left without support. You always worry too much. With Rusty, we can never lose. Both Astrella and Eri punched the air in a display of confidence, which made Gwen chuckle. Her disposition had become more cheerful lately, but today she looked pale. I think we should probably go. Yeah, let's see what those teachers prepared this time. I heard our class lost badly last time, and because of that, 2 spots opened up for us. Gwen nodded, and soon the 2 girls were walking out of their dorm. No one knew what awaited them in the class competition, but word had already begun to spread through the corridors. Students from every class lined the walkways, some whispering excitedly, others casting curious glances at Gwen as she passed. They are from B1. We should go and get some good seats. We should. To Rusty, who had been here for about a week, this was no longer such a strange phenomenon. It seemed that the humanoids at this academy turned everything into a spectacle for others to watch. When he was first summoned, he stood in a large arena, observed by many. The second time, it happened in a closed-off space, yet he later learned that the entire process was still being shown to others. It became clear that people here liked to rank one another by ability, and when someone failed, many were quick to point fingers. It was a harsh and competitive environment, one in which he fully intended to succeed. Their group of 2 continued walking until they arrived at an open-air area. It was a wide space of polished grey stone, and this time there were seats arranged around them, similar to the arena where he had fought his first duel. Above, strange glowing orbs floated in the air. At first, Rusty did not understand their purpose, but then the one in the center began to glow brighter. Within it, he saw 2 familiar figures, both teachers he had seen before. "Please line up everyone. B1 to the left and B2 to the right gate." The more rotund man was speaking. Rusty recalled his name was Harold, the head teacher of Class B2, and Quientin stood beside him. Rusty watched in fascination as the large orb above them perfectly mimicked the teacher's movements, projecting their actions in real time. It was something he had never seen before, though he could loosely place it alongside similar things he remembered from Alexander's old thoughts. "They are taking out the wheel," Gwen whispered to Astrella, who replied. "I hope it doesn't land on the personal duels. I'd just have to give up." Astrella had no combat-ready summon. While Eri could manipulate things like branches and roots, it was more suited for binding than for attacking. "If it comes to that, I'll leave it all up to you guys." Sibir was now standing near the 2 girls as well. Even though he did not seem to appreciate the company, they had gravitated toward him ever since the Void Gate incident. Well, if it isn't Urania Venom Ridge. I hope you are ready to lose to me like you did last time." As the trio was discussing something, a voice called out from Class B2. It belonged to a large, bearish-looking young man, someone who did not fit the usual image of a summoner but also fully human. His gaze locked onto Urania, who was considered the leader of their class. The small spider on her shoulder released a strange hissing sound at him, prompting Urania to pet it to calm it down gently. "This time it will be different. You will see." Yet, it was not Urania who spoke, but her 2 henchmen, Eldrick and Aldric. The moment they did, they received a sharp glare from the large student of Class B2, which made them both flinch. "Ha, that is what I thought. All bark and no bite. No more whispering. Line up in order." Before the chatting could continue, Quentin called out to them. Soon, everyone was lined up neatly in 3 rows, and all eyes fell on the strange wheel positioned between 2 large teleportation gates. Rusty was too busy staring at the floating orbs to ask about its purpose, but he could at least see that words were written across its surface. "It's starting. I wonder what it will be. I hope it's not just killing monsters, I want to see them fight." While the students were forced to remain silent, the people around them continued to talk among themselves. All eyes were fixed on the wheel in the center, and soon it began to spin. It was divided into several segments with titles such as Personal Duels, Summon Hunt and Territory Control. The wheel spun for a good 10 seconds before it began to slow. Tick. 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 An arrow at the top of the wheel pointed downward as it gradually came to a stop. The chosen words glowed and pushed forward in a shimmering illusion, and the same text appeared on the large floating orbs above. "Flag Defense and Capture." Rusty read the words aloud, unsure of what the selection implied. "Oh, thank the stars." Astrella exhaled in clear relief, her shoulders relaxing as she clasped her hands together. "Flag Defense and Capture is much better than Personal Duels. I would not be so sure." Sibir folded his arms and looked far less pleased. "What do you mean?" Astrella asked. "You will see once we get there." "What is that supposed to mean, you big idiot?" Sibir turned his head away from her, which only made her angrier. Eri copied her summoner's furious expression, leaving Rusty even more confused. "So, about this competition." Now that the category had been chosen, he finally asked Gwen to explain. The other students reacted with a mixture of emotions. Some looked relieved, like Astrella, while others clearly felt disappointed. From Rusty's perspective, more students in Class B2 seemed pleased with the outcome. "Ah!" Gwen opened her mouth to answer, but she was interrupted when the large student shouted and pointed across the arena. "Haha, you are going down, Venom Ridge. You do not stand a chance if it is flag defense. This will be easy." The students from B2 were smirking as if the outcome had already been decided. Rusty did not understand why their opponents were so confident. With his mana sense, he could gauge the strength of most people present, and both classes seemed roughly equal, although he would have given B1 a slight advantage as he was among them. The students around him did not seem to share that opinion, and at last Gwen took the chance to explain. Flag defense and capture is simple. Both teams receive a flag that they must protect. The opposing team must capture it and bring it back to their own camp. A group wins only when both flags are in the same camp. Sounds interesting. Rusty was intrigued by the event and wondered how it would play out. He realized immediately that the main challenge would be securing both flags at the same time. So, could we hide our flag in my body and then take the other one? He asked because he was not completely sure about the rules. We probably could, but I am not sure that would be a good idea. Oh, it would not. As he pressed for more details, the two gates nearby began to activate. Each teacher poured magical power into them until a whirlpool of mana formed at the center. Proceed through the gate. The competition will last at most 1 day. If no one achieves victory by then, the teachers will review the battles and decide the winner. Now go. Quentin urged his students forward. The B2 group was already passing through, and Harold wore a confident grin as if certain of his class's success. Rusty and the others followed. The sensation of traveling through the teleportation gate reminded Rusty of the Void Gate, although the place they arrived in was completely different. Is that our flag? Rusty jumped down from Gwen's shoulders and activated his skill to reveal his true form. His size expanded, and he found himself in his enchanted steel body. Once he was there, his gaze instantly fell onto a rather large pole with a blue flag on it. It had the Academy logo on it and was placed in the middle of what looked to be a small stronghold. It reminded him slightly of Ferndale as the walls were similar, only built of sturdier stone. Beside the flag stood another socket meant for the second flag. They would need to bring that flag here and place it inside. Only when both were gathered would the event end. This meant that one main strategy presented itself. A group of students would need to defend this flag while another group set out to siege the opposing B2 class stronghold. They would need to attack and defend at the same time. The rules allowed the students to remove the flag from the area and carry it along. However, this approach would free the opposing group from the need to attack and would let them focus entirely on protecting their own flag. Such an approach would work only if the two groups were not evenly matched. The defenders naturally held the advantage because they had a moat, guard towers, and battlements. There seemed to be many tactics involved in this test. The students would need to plan carefully who would attack and who would defend the area. Rusty, with his metal body, could be placed anywhere, but some of the summons were probably better suited for this terrain. The moat was wide and filled to the brim with water. There was one main entrance gate that pointed toward another structure in the distance. They found themselves on top of an elevated space surrounded by a thick forest and other natural barriers. Maybe the more agile summons should be the ones to attack, but perhaps I could also ride one of them. Rusty already liked the idea of charging through the forests to fight. Yet his contemplations were interrupted by something he did not expect. What do you dislike about it? It's obvious that Lady Venomridge will be our leader. Why would she be the leader? She does not even seem interested in ordering anyone around. Astrella and Eldrick, who had confronted Gwen in the earlier seating dispute, were arguing again. The class was split into several groups, and a clear leadership problem had formed. Was this what Sibber meant? Rusty wondered as he watched the scattered groups struggling to organize. Without a real leader, creating a proper plan would be difficult. Lady Venomridge has the highest combat rating in Class B1. Eldrick snapped and gestured sharply at Arania, who stood at ease and looked almost bored, as if the decision meant nothing to her. It only makes sense that she leads. Is that all you have? Astrella laughed as if Eldrick's argument held no weight. That is only because she has never faced Gwen. If she had, she would have lost just as you did. You have only seen a fraction of Gwen's power. Astrella finished proudly and planted her hands on her hips. Eri copied the gesture while balancing on her head. That is nonsense, and you know it. Eldrick's face turned red with anger. His snake hissed beside him, yet Astrella showed no fear at all. Rusty's presence at her side seemed to give her confidence. Rusty himself was confused by the entire argument and wondered if this was why Class B2 felt so sure of their victory. B1, the class he fought for, had no real leader, and the one who was supposed to be the strongest did not seem to care. While the others argued, Arania lifted her sleeve to hide a yawn. Perhaps she had not slept well, Or perhaps she simply cared even less about the competition. Even if they lost, she would not be removed from this class, as she was still considered the top student there. The only thing that seemed to hold her interest was glancing at Rusty. When he tilted his metallic head toward her, she straightened for a moment, then quickly looked away as if embarrassed. This might be a problem. Rusty knew that any large group needed a clear command structure. Even a poor tactic could work if everyone followed it together. Without a leader, people would act independently and weaken their chances of success. The other class had a leader, and even if he seemed like a complete midwit, he had managed to unite his group. What nonsense! The argument worsened quickly as Estrella kept pushing her point. Gwen is clearly the one who should lead. You two just got here and know nothing. Step aside, know your place. Eldrick kept arguing, and it was clear this would lead nowhere. It was time for him to step in. He might have been only a summon to these people, but every action he took reflected on his summoner, and he intended to use that to his advantage. Gwen, I am sorry, but you will have to act as the temporary leader if we want to win. Rusty spoke through their connection, and Gwen looked completely taken aback. I will have to do what? Her tone revealed her surprise. She was not used to being assertive, but something had to change. Someone needed to create even a simple plan that all of these students could follow. Without that, the arguing would only escalate, and they would end up fighting among themselves or forced into a hopeless defensive stance. He stepped forward just as Estrella was about to shout a string of insults at her fellow student. You are just a Rusty. The moment he appeared, Eldrick stepped back. He knew Rusty's strength and understood that his own snake could be crushed with little effort. You will have to take control, Gwen. Tell them that you'll be the temporary leader. I do not know. Shouldn't Urania lead? She has been in the class longer, and she knows the other students. As he expected, she was not willing to step forward. Her shoulders slumped, and she seemed to shrink into herself. Yet without her help, he could not make this work. He could not communicate with the others, and asking someone for a severed head so he could speak was out of the question. They would not listen to a summoned creature anyway. It had to be Gwen who spoke for him. Then repeat the words I am about to tell you. I am sure the others will understand. And if they do not? Rusty drove the shaft of his halberd into the ground. The impact cracked the hard stone beneath them. Thin fractures spread outward like a spider web, startling nearly every student with the sheer force behind the blow. If Era. I mean, Lady Venomridge doesn't feel like leading, then. Gwen swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper at first. Every pair of eyes slowly turned toward her. Then I will be the leader, for now, since no one else seems to want to. Silence fell over the small stronghold, and even the wind seemed to pause. You forgot the most important part, Gwen. Tell them that if someone refuses, I will beat them up. Rusty tried to push his summoner into showing more resolve, but she clearly did not want to threaten anyone. I can't say that. She answered through their connection. The other students were not looking at her anyway. Their eyes were fixed on Urania, who had become the closest thing to a leader among them. At the same time, they were unsure how strong this new arrival might be. Some of them began to inch away as if a fight was about to break out, but when Urania finally spoke, everyone froze. Thou desirest to be the leader? I suppose thou have some manner of plan? Urania blinked once and watched Gwen, waiting for her answer. The students around them looked surprised. Many of them had expected a battle for leadership, yet the two were simply talking. A plan? Why yes, I have a plan. Gwen forced a smile and then quietly asked Rusty through their bond. Do we have a plan, Rusty? Rusty nodded. He had already considered what needed to be done. He could not expect much from these children. They were uncoordinated and more concerned with increasing their mana or summoning creatures than practicing teamwork. They needed something simple that they could follow without confusion. Yes, I have a plan. It is very easy. We will divide everyone into two groups. One will defend and the other will attack, and I already know who should go where. Although he had not been at the academy long, he had plenty of time to observe the students of Class B1. Throughout the week, each of them had summoned their creatures at some point, giving him a clear view of their skills. He was not sure if it was a burden's influence, but his memory was excellent. With this knowledge, he could choose who fit each role best. What is thy plan then? Ah, yes, well. Gwen paused for a moment while Rusty gave her the gist of the situation. The other students looked confused as she kept glancing at him, yet the plan soon took shape before them. The plan is simple. We will divide into 2 teams, one for attacking and one for defense. Lady Venomridge will lead the attack while I remain here to defend our flag. Some of the students nodded, seeing nothing wrong with this, but one of Arania's lackeys immediately complained. You just want Lady Venomridge to do all of your dirty work while you stay behind and let our flag get stolen. It was Eldrick again, and Astrella struck back without hesitation. Losers should be quiet while the leader is talking. What did you call me? Thou shalt be quiet. Before another fight could break out, Arania raised her hand to silence her follower. Eldrick stopped talking at once. Arania then spoke again. Continue. Who will be joining my group? Gwen was somewhat surprised. She had expected more resistance from the strongest student of Class B1, yet Arania seemed unusually willing to cooperate. Eldrick will go with you, since his snakes can easily ambush anyone from B2 inside the forest. Sibber as well. The students listened with growing surprise as she continued listing names and explaining each person's strengths. Summons that were fast, mobile, or capable of slipping through the forest were assigned to the attacking team. Those that were more stationary or suited to guarding positions were placed on defense to protect the flag. Haha, I get to be on Team Gwen. Tough luck, Sibber. Astrella sounded pleased as she mocked Sibber for ending up with the attackers. I do not care. Sure you don't. Sibber genuinely seemed indifferent. Even though he still disliked showing his bestial form in front of others, he appeared willing to use it if it meant winning the competition. He also knew that if he didn't, Astrella would never shut up about it. Please stop calling it that, Astrella. Gwen protested about the name, but her friend just stuck out her tongue at her while giggling. Soon, the groups finished forming, and Arania's team prepared to head out. The small spider she kept with her dropped to the ground and revealed its true form. Just like Rusty under the reduction spell, it could not show its full strength, but once unleashed, it was far more terrifying than any spider monster Rusty had encountered before. The creature expanded until it stood larger than a horse. Its body was a blend of purple and black, shaped like an armored arachnid. Its 8 blade-like legs sank into the stone with effortlessness, and a faint shimmer moved across the plates of its carapace. Veins of violet mana pulsed beneath the armor in steady intervals, similar to a beating heart. Several students instinctively stepped back, even those who moments before had stood close to Arania. This type of monster provoked a deep instinctive fear in humanoids, and Rusty was not entirely sure he could defeat it without taking a lot of damage. To him, it seemed powerful enough to belong to someone from A class. The spider lowered its massive body so Arania could climb onto its back. She settled between 2 ridges of hardened armor, perfectly at ease as if the creature were no more threatening than a gentle riding mount. Let us be off. Arania said, her calm voice cutting cleanly through the tension that lingered over the class. Don't return without the flag. Astrella called out as she waved at Sibber. Just make sure it isn't stolen before then. He answered before passing through the entrance gate. His figure faded from sight. While the other summoners followed the large spider, Sibber broke away from the group and headed toward the side of the forest, disappearing into the brush. Are you sure this is going to work? Do we have enough people to defend ourselves? It should be fine. We only need to hold out until they return. There was a second part of the plan concerning the attackers, but everything depended on the defenders keeping the flag inside their stronghold until their allies came back. Most of their forces had been sent out to attack, leaving only a handful behind. Eldrick, the second follower of Arania, had been ordered to stay, and he did not look pleased about it. This better work. He muttered while looking at Gwen with open hostility. She almost flinched, but Rusty stepped between them and forced Eldrick to retreat a step. It will. Please take your position as we discussed. With Rusty next to her, there was no hesitation in her tone. Tisk. The young man turned away and began summoning his monsters. While his friend Eldrick specialized in snakes, Eldrick focused on other creatures, particularly rock golems. A magic circle appeared at his feet, and a humanoid shape slowly emerged from the swirling light. The golem rose from the summoning circle like a statue torn free from the earth. Its granite shoulders were rounded and heavy, and its arms nearly dragged along the ground. The creature's legs were thick, and instead of hands, it bore large boulders that had spikes. It moved with a slow and ponderous stride, built almost entirely for defense. This made it unsuitable for traveling through the forest, where it would only slow down the others. It was an E+ monster, and like Aldrich could summon several of them along with smaller variants. Before long, the flag was guarded by 2 large golems and 3 smaller ones. Rusty opened his inventory and took out the bow he had brought with him. He had been unable to use it inside the Void Gate, but for defending a fort, ranged attacks were essential. He and Gwen made their way to the battlements and climbed into one of the watchtowers to watch for approaching enemies. "Do you think they will get the flag?" Gwen asked Astrella as the girl joined them. "I am not a fan of that Arania, but she is strong. If everything goes according to the plan, that idiot should be able to pull it off." "You should really stop calling him that." "But he is, his only redeeming feature is that face, but don't tell him that, don't give him any ideas." "I won't." The two continued talking, but Rusty paid them no attention. His visor was fixed on the distant B2 stronghold. He expected that a skirmish would break out in the forest first, and that eventually their opponents would reach the walls. When that happened, the task of defeating the B2 class leader would likely fall to him. He eventually glanced at the other participants of the defense as their creatures were summoned. First came the archers, the cornerstone of their formation. Some were kobolds, others were hobgoblins or orcs. They carried mostly ranged weapons, although each could switch to close-quarter arms when the time came. Inside their stronghold, there was very little. The flag stood in the center and there was nothing around it. The stronghold was round, a little over 100 meters in diameter, and large enough to hold several large monsters. If the walls were breached, this would be the place of their last stand. Some summoners controlled plant-based creatures that could not move, yet had many other uses. They could bind attackers with their many limbs, release poisonous gas, and even fire projectiles from afar. These creatures were placed along the edges of the main yard, waiting to be activated. There is a lot of variety among these summons, and some of these people can call on different creatures depending on the situation, but the same is true for our opponents. Rusty kept scanning the distant tree line, waiting for the first sign of movement. The boredom he had felt while stuck in the dorm with Gwen the night before had vanished. Now he felt only the anticipation of facing many different opponents. Moments passed, and the air grew still. Then, suddenly, came shouting. "What was that?" A student asked the question as strange howls and cries rose from within the forest. The battle had clearly begun, and the attackers from B1 and B2 were already clashing with each other. The battle had started, and it was time to complete this mission. The howls in the forest grew louder and closer. The clash between the summoned beasts from both classes sounded ferocious. Even from a distance, Rusty could see trees shaking and collapsing as they were slashed or smashed by something with incredible strength. Rusty tightened his grip on the bow and drew his first arrow. His life detection skill could not reach the edges of the forest, so he had to rely on his mana perception and sight instead. The moment he saw ripples forming, he took aim and fired his first shot just as a strange mantis-like monster emerged from within. It was not a normal mantis, as its size was comparable to that of a person. It was also not alone. Several others like it came crawling out of the brush. The moment they laid their insectoid eyes on the small stronghold, they let out a strange, piercing shriek before charging forward. His arrow collided with one of the monster's heads, turning it into particles of mana almost instantly. Yet as soon as it fell, another took its place. The siege had begun, and soon more monsters poured out of the forest. Their summoners appeared as well, but they concealed themselves behind groups of creatures, rocks, and their own spells. Just like in the previous test, if a summoner was defeated, their creature would vanish. Everyone here only had one life, and if they suffered sufficient damage, they would be forced out by the teachers. This was one of the reasons defending was easier. It was far better to focus on the summoners, but the attackers needed to expose themselves if they wanted to capture the flag. That pesky range we need to maintain around our summoners comes in handy at times like this. They won't be able to stay behind those trees and rocks if they want this flag. His plan was simple. He would target the summoners and take them out. If they defeated enough of them, the other group would be forced to ask for reinforcements from their stronghold. However, this required the cooperation of the entire class, and when it came to teamwork, the opposing class seemed to be superior. Why do I have to order my orcs to use bows? They are much better in close combat than this. This is a waste of my skills. Just be quiet and shoot. They are coming. Fine. Some of the students manning the walls and ordering their monsters to fire arrows were already complaining. These mages carried a great deal of pride. Most of them seemed to be nobility or descendants of wealthy merchants who disliked being told what to do. Only when a high noble was present would they truly listen. Gwen, who came from a fallen noble house, did not seem to command that level of prestige yet. They are advancing, shoot. A swarm of arrows flew through the air and embedded themselves in the insectoid monsters. They were not alone, as other creatures such as snakes, salamanders, and, as always, orcs advanced with them. Some held shields as they slowly moved toward the moat area. The bridge leading in could not be pulled up and it created a death zone through which they needed to funnel if they wanted to get inside. To make things more interesting, a few flying creatures appeared as well. Never seen that one. Classification: Brown Feather Harpy E. Type: Humanoid/Beast. Description: Fusions of bird and human that possess crooked talons and ragged wings. They usually appear in groups and lure their prey with a sweet melody. Their main attack consists of dragging the victim into the air and letting them drop to their doom. Flying units, left side. One of the students shouted as a group of harpies attacked. 2 of them were shot down, but another duo managed to lift one of the kobold archers high into the air. Once they were high enough, they let go, and the poor summoned beast crashed into the ground below, turning into mana particles in an instant. Rusty's eyes locked onto the incoming harpies as they swooped overhead, their wings beating in a strange rhythm. He instantly let one of his arrows fly, and it connected with the monster's head. For him, who was a D-rank monster, it only took one shot to make the creatures dissolve into mana, but for the E-rank monsters, it was not as easy. Even after multiple arrows were lodged in the harpy's body, they managed to persist and pull some of their creatures off the walls. This battle looks strange. For a moment, Rusty stopped attacking as he watched the fight unfold. Monsters were dying left and right. It felt like a real battle, but the number of attackers was not dwindling. Even when an orc or a kobold died, it was replaced by another. The summoners within the stronghold continued to pull back the spent mana or drink mana potions to restore it. Some even stood in strange formations that seemed to lessen the strain on their casting, and the other group was doing the same. Even after defeating multiple of those insectoid foes, some that could also fly, there seemed to be no end to them. It was a stalemate. The monsters could not really get through the walls, but even after defeating tens of enemies, they only needed to spend some mana to restore themselves. They are slowly moving forward, getting closer and closer while using their monsters as meat shields. More and more summoners appeared from within the forest. Some large rocks and slopes could be used as cover, and with every passing minute, they were moving to take the main gate. Wait, what is that sound? Something big is coming. The ground trembled. At first, it was subtle, more a vibration than a true quake, but within seconds, the tremor grew into something heavy. Even the golems that stood around their flag started shaking, and in the distance, trees started being pushed apart as something emerged. It then came into view, a colossal beast burst from the treeline, scattering mantis creatures and orcs alike as if they were nothing more than leaves in its path. It had the head of a wolf but was built like a massive armored bear. It was a strange fusion of a monster much bigger than a grizzly, its frame wider than a carriage and taller than even a horse. To make things even more interesting, it had someone riding on its back. What's taking you so long? You people are useless. The man on its back was the bearish, large-framed youth who had proclaimed B2 class victory before the competition even started. He sat upon its back, which had an especially made saddle and harness. He even had reins similar to those of a horse, but adjusted for the monster's head. It looked more like a mount than a summon and radiated power that was on par with Arania's summon. Classification: Armored Bear Wolf D. Type: Beast. Description: An apex predator created through forced fusion magic. Possesses immense physical strength, heightened regenerative capabilities, and is capable of sustained berserk states when commanded by a bonded summoner. Armor covers most of its body, and its bite and claws can shred through hardened steel. It's Bartholomew. Wasn't Arania supposed to keep him busy? Shouted Astrella as she ordered Aerie to form a shield around the entrance gate. That's Lady Venomridge to you. Shouted Aldrich, who offered help by sending one of his golems to push against the doors that they knew were going to be attacked. Perhaps they had some tactics to keep her occupied, but as long as we lasted out, this might be a good thing. The humanoid is clearly proud and thinks that Arania is his only real obstacle. Everyone pointed their bows at the charging bear wolf. They flew in a nice arc and connected, but instead of creating holes, they all just bounced back. Even the ones that collided with Bartholomew himself were deflected by a mana shield. The young man just continued laughing and pushed forward as if his summons was some kind of armored siege engine. Rusty reacted quickly, pulling back the string of his bow and activating the power shot skill. He was at the same rank as the monster and probably the only one capable of dealing real damage to it. Just like before, his arrow flew, but this time it was surrounded by red energy and moved far faster. Yet when it struck the monster's side, it left little more than a scratch on its hardened armor. He did not panic. He notched another arrow and aimed for the man riding the beast. It was not an easy shot, and he was not a specialized archer, but he waited patiently for the right moment before letting it fly. Just like before, the arrow hit its mark, but once again it proved useless. A thick mana barrier shimmered around Bartholomew as the arrow bounced off without penetrating. It had some effect, but I won't get much with this. While his attacks were not entirely pointless, the damage his opponents sustained was minimal. It was clear that the creature was built for defense and raw power. It was not agile enough to avoid his shots, but it did not need to be. Soon, the bear-wolf reached the gate and slammed its massive body into the closed entrance. Ugh! I don't think I can take many of those. Astrella groaned as she poured more mana into Eri, who was shielding their entrance. Bartholomew urged his mount forward, and the armored bear-wolf rose onto its hind legs before slamming its full weight into the gate. The impact echoed like thunder, and it was clear the entrance was about to give way. Ha, this is too easy. That's why summon riders are superior to everyone. Summon riders. Summon riders are. Gwen started to explain, but he cut her off. I can guess well enough. There's no time for that, Gwen. Bring out the parts we saved. I'm going to stop that bear. Ah, sure. Be careful, Rusty. Bartholomew is strong enough to be accepted into A class. Rusty imagined that this summon rider was another form of summoner. At first, he had thought summoners were simply mages who relied on creatures and stayed safely behind them. However, after seeing Sibir and now Bartholomew, he knew better. There were clearly multiple paths to strength within this single profession. Fusing with monsters, riding them into battle, and forming deep bonds with them all seemed to amplify their power. Bonds with the summoner, hey! For a moment, he looked at Gwen as she opened her bag of holding. From within, she pulled out the monster armor parts they had saved from the corrupt void gate, but that was not what occupied his thoughts. Instead, he wondered if his bond with this girl was making him stronger. After each mission, he had become a little better and earned many rewards. Yet it was not only his power that was growing. A strange attachment was beginning to take hold, one that made him want to see her succeed in this unfamiliar world filled with mystical beings. With the parts laid out, he put his puppeteering skill to use. The armor taken from the Red Hobgoblin Knight was far bulkier than the rest and demanded the most of his mana, but it was still worth the cost. With Gwen lending him her mana, he could fight almost without pause, and it would likely fall to him to stop the monster and those behind it from breaking through. I'm going in, be sure to hide, Gwen. You're going in? What do you mean? As Gwen spoke, Rusty seized two of the puppets he had created and leapt forward, accompanied by the strongest one formed from the Hobgoblin Knight's parts, which moved on its own. They landed with a solid impact right in front of the hulking bear and the rider commanding it. Out of my way! You must be that fallen noble's minions. Living armor is no match for my bear wolf. Bartholomew hesitated for only a moment before regaining his composure. All he saw were a few mismatched living suits of armor, something his bear could tear apart with a single swipe. When it did just that, something strange occurred. What? The massive paw was stopped, the force spreading harmlessly as Rusty held his ground. Instead of being pushed back, the three armor puppets behind him surged forward, charging toward the summoner perched atop the enormous bear wolf. With a thrust, he landed a solid blow on the monster's neck area, but even his halberd bounced off without fully penetrating. From his identification skill, it seemed that this monster was not completely armored, yet he could not see any gaps. Is it the belly, but how do I reach it? Crush them! Bartholomew gave the order, and his monster obeyed. The beast lunged, its jaws snapping wide enough to swallow Rusty's upper half, but he had already moved. The two lesser puppets darted to either side, their joints clanking as they circled around to get behind it. Both carried spears, and their task was to create chaos from the rear. The mismatched knight armor moved to one side while Rusty controlled the bear wolf's head. When it snapped at him, he raised his shield and even slammed it into its large wolf nose. Soon, he and his puppets were striking at it from all directions, and the young man riding it was starting to lose his patience. You dare! Stop moving! He continued pointing at the metal puppets around him, but this only confused his mount. Each time the large summon was about to crush one of the puppets, Rusty thrust forward with all his strength. Even though he could not reach the soft underbelly, as long as he focused on a single spot, he would eventually weaken its armored defenses. With each hit, particles of mana flickered, showing that he was slowly making progress. We need to help Lord Woodward. However, the young man was not alone. Once the other summoners saw that their leader could not break through, they changed their tactics. Rusty had hoped that seeing their strongest fighter pushed back would break their will, but they were more coordinated than he had expected. Soon, one of his lesser puppets was smacked aside by a large mantis and then crushed by the bear wolf. With its metal bent out of shape, he could not restore it, as it was not a true summoned creature like the others. We need to aid Rainstar's summons. Still, he was not entirely alone. Arrows soon flew from the walls, aimed at the smaller creatures trying to assist Bartholomew. Neither side let up, but time was against them. The longer the battle dragged on, the more their walls and entrance suffered damage. Their defenses were slowly beginning to crumble, yet they had to hold out until their companions returned with the other flag. Keep her busy, don't let her leave. As long as we keep her here, we're sure to win just like last time. No, watch out! In a clearing, a humongous spider lifted its head as poison hissed between its fangs. Arania's massive purple and black summon lashed out at the smaller creatures that surrounded it. Its abdomen glowed faintly, and a burst of purplish fumes suddenly spread in every direction. The ring of summoned beasts that had been encircling the large spider began to fall. The poison seeped into the veins of the orcs, lizards, and wolves nearby, leaving only the rock golems still standing. Even the poisonous snakes and large insects, normally resistant to such attacks, collapsed as everyone was forced to retreat. We must use inorganic summons. Quickly, make more golems and elemental constructs. A member of Class B2 shouted this while working to keep the spider occupied. The other students focused on replacing their creatures with rocky humanoids and constructs resembling swirling clouds of wind energy. Arania sat atop her spider as if it were a mount. She was not alone. Eldrick, her loyal follower, remained at her side, his snakes somehow unaffected by the poisonous mist. Lady Venomridge, you need to escape. I will distract them. You should take the chance and leave. That would ruin the plan, would it not? She responded with a blank expression, leaving the other student baffled. Are you truly going to follow that plan? Can we really trust them? Yes. Why not? Her voice carried a bored tone, as if her decision were the most obvious choice. Eldrick looked troubled by the idea but eventually nodded and turned his gaze toward the 6 summoners surrounding them. Their monsters were not especially powerful, yet their numbers and coordinated tactics were proving effective. Even when they managed to defeat a few of the summoned creatures, another wave appeared almost immediately to stall for time. This was still part of the plan. Their goal was to limit the number of defenders and attackers heading for their own base. The rest was up to the others, and Eldrick was far from convinced that they could accomplish their tasks. If Lady Venomridge believes they can. Eldrick bit his lower lip. He could not bring himself to oppose Arania. Although he had little trust in the rest of the class, he would at least place his faith in her. He soon summoned his snakes to form a protective circle around her. Even when the golems attacked, he ordered his monsters to coil around them. With enough force, the stones began to crack, and once their legs were bound, the golems toppled easily to the ground. The large spider remained deadly. Although the poison cloud did not affect the inorganic summons, there were other ways to harm them. The huge spider opened its mouth and released a concentrated beam of energy. The moment it struck one of the wind elementals, the creature vanished instantly, turning to more particles of mana to fuel both sides of the conflict. What are you idiots doing? A furious youth shouted as he rode a bear with the head of a wolf. Behind him a group of students clustered together with their orc summons, each orc holding a large shield to block the arrows raining down from the stronghold walls. We cannot get through, like this. One of the students peeked out from behind a shield and was immediately struck by an arrow from above. His mana shield shattered, and a swirl of energy enveloped him as the competition removed him from the field. He would soon join the others who had already been eliminated as the event moved into its middle stages. As he was removed, several orcs that he had been controlling vanished instantly. Get that thing out of my sight. I do not care how you do it. Bartholomew Woodward, the top student of Class B2 and its current leader, shouted in frustration while his bear-wolf was pushed back again. Despite its greater power and size, and despite Bartholomew's belief that it was superior in every possible way to the flimsy living armor standing before it, the creature could not force its way through. Rusty proved unexpectedly agile, parrying attacks and slipping through narrow openings whenever the monster lunged with its jaws. The longer the fight went on, the more familiar he became with its rhythm. 15 minutes had already passed, and he had traded many blows with the beast, each exchange ending with its retreat. "I am holding out for now, but they might break through soon." Rusty knew he could not last forever. The only reason he had endured this long was Bartholomew's arrogance. The young man was convinced of his own superiority and insisted on facing Rusty alone while his companions stayed back and acted only as ranged support. They waited for him to break through the gate, yet he continued to fail. If they all charged together, Rusty knew the outcome would be very different. His body was durable, and none of their E-rank arrows could leave a dent. He blocked another swipe as the bear-wolf's claws scraped against his enchanted twilight steel. The impact cracked the ground beneath his armored boots. His body held firm, yet he could feel his opponent growing desperate. That was stronger than before. He is pushing more mana into it. Bartholomew's jaw twitched as he forced more mana into the summoned beast he rode. The creature beneath him heaved and snarled, its breath steaming. It might have been a construct of mana, but it still followed the limits of flesh. Its stamina was failing, and constant injections of new mana would not be enough for long. "Enough of this charade!" Bartholomew shouted, his voice shaking with anger. "You think your trash armor puppets can stand before a true rider?" Rusty did not respond. He shifted his stance and braced as the bear-wolf lowered its head and charged again with such force that the air boomed under the pressure. Rusty slid back a few steps, yet with the aid of weight control, he refused to be moved any farther despite his smaller size. "Now!" He drove his halberd into the weakened spot he had targeted again and again. His skills and enchantments flared at once and lightning raced along the embedded weapon. The monster's armor had cracked enough for the blade to sink deep. The surge of energy ran down the creature's neck and even struck the rider above. "Gah! You dare!" Bartholomew screamed as the shock reached him. His eyes bulged in surprise and pain. The creature staggered back, and mana particles scattered from the wound along its neck. Even so, the young man instantly pulled out a bottle of mana to drink it and then restored his beast to full health. "That is it. Enough is enough. Everyone charge with me. I will open the path." "But the arrows?" one of the students tried to warn. Their troops would be injured if they rushed in without caution, but the attempt only made Bartholomew even angrier. "I do not care. Use your summons as shields. Use your potions. We are getting into that stronghold, and we are doing it now." Rusty did not know what they were planning, but he suddenly felt a massive surge of mana coming from his opponent. He had assumed the potion was a simple mana potion, yet the energy felt different. It reminded him of his duel with Catherine Grandwell. The armored bear-wolf began to change. It grew larger, and sharp spikes erupted along its plated form. Its fangs lengthened, and its claws followed as it released a roar that shook the field. Rusty had never seen a summon transform like this. When he used his identification skill, the truth appeared before him. Classification: Armored Bear-Wolf D-Mind Merger. Type: Beast. His opponent had gained a strange status that Rusty had never encountered. The creature started behaving strangely at first, as if it was enraged, before finally calming itself down. To make matters even more peculiar, Bartholomew's eyes glowed red, and the bear-wolf's eyes matched the same eerie light. "Lord Woodward has activated Mind Merger. Make sure you do not get in his way." "What is that strange skill?" He had no idea what he was dealing with, but Gwen stepped in to answer. "Be careful, Rusty. With Mind Merger, he can control his summon as if they were the same person." Oh! It was similar to a fusion skill, yet the summon and its rider did not combine into a single being. They remained separate, but the boost in power was obvious. The bear's movements became fluid and precise, almost as if the humanoid rider had taken direct command of its body. The creature suddenly moved with intelligence and strategy. The rider leaned forward on his monstrous mount. His breath came in short gasps that matched the rhythm of the beast beneath him. A moment later, he charged. The bear-wolf had grown heavier, and its momentum increased. The puppet formed from the hobgoblin knight swung its weapon in an attempt to stop it, but the blow bounced harmlessly off one of the creature's spikes as it barreled past. This might be dangerous. Rusty knew from experience that facing the charge in his current form would end in disaster. If he could use his loadout to shift into his larger form, he might stand a chance, but as things were he could not overpower it. Even so, he could not simply allow it to break through. He raised his shield, increased his weight, and braced himself. The monster slammed into him a heartbeat later. His joints cracked under the pressure as he was forced back. Holding his ground was impossible, so he moved with the momentum and pushed himself to the side. As he slipped past, he swung his halberd and aimed for the creature's unarmored eye. Arg! Bartholomew screamed in agony as if the pierced eye belonged to him. The summon and rider pair did not slow as they charged through. The gate finally gave way, and Ares' efforts to keep the shield up were for nothing. It shattered almost instantly when the massive creature barreled through, and more soon followed. "Get the flag!" shouted the summoners from B2 class. "Protect the flag!" shouted the ones from B1 class as all hell broke loose. The monsters on the walls leapt down and switched from bows to close-range weapons. Their summoners were now in real danger of being removed from the competition. If they fell, their creatures would vanish, and the other team would gain the advantage. "Rusty!" Gwen called to him as she found herself under attack. She and Astrella were forced to retreat since they had little power on their own. Only one iron armor stood between them and the enemy, and his hobgoblin knight armor soon joined the defense. "Stay put, Gwen!" came his response. The true threat was the flag, and Bartholomew was charging straight for it. Aldrich's golems rushed to intercept him, and the plant summons hidden as traps fired thorn volleys, but every projectile bounced harmlessly off him. The first few golems were shoved aside, yet when all of them pushed together, they managed, for a few breaths, to bring his maddened charge to a halt. Chaos flooded their stronghold as summoned creatures clashed everywhere. Insectoids fought kobolds. Harpies tried to carry orcs into the air to drop them. Rusty pushed through the crowd of enemies, swinging his halberd and felling them in 1 or 2 strokes. "He is not quite there, I can make it," Rusty thought to himself as he sprinted with all his might. A low growl rose from Bartholomew, almost like a wolf's, as he forced the rock golems aside. "Out of my way! This flag is mine! I will not allow it! I must fulfill the duty Lady Urania placed on." Aldrich began to launch into a monologue, but before he could finish, one of his own golems flew through the air and crashed down on top of him. "I do not care!" Bartholomew growled as the remaining golems shattered the moment their summoner fell. Rusty was surprised that the boy had been defeated so easily, yet the setback gave him just enough time to move in front of the flag. "It is you again! I will turn you into scrap metal!" Rusty planted his halberd in the ground and shifted his stance. His armor was already damaged, but Gwen continued to lend him her power and slowly restored him. The final battle had begun, and the clash between rider and monster was now unavoidable. He activated several of his skills, including Fury, Twilight Embrace, and others. His halberd crackled with lightning as he gripped it with both hands. The time for defense had passed, and he committed fully to the attack. Sparks flew as he traded blow after blow with the empowered bear-wolf creature. It was far stronger than before, and with the rider on its back, it carried much more mana than Rusty had expected. Even when his halberd sliced away the thorns that jutted from its armored hide, they grew back within seconds. Sparks crackled and danced along Rusty's halberd as he met the beast's onslaught head-on. Every impact strained the joints of his armor, and each exchange left a cratered mark in the ground beneath them. Bartholomew's fused fury drove the bear-wolf forward without pause. "Break! Break already!" Bartholomew's voice blended with the roar of his summon until the two sounds became impossible to tell apart. The beast lunged with its jaws wide, but Rusty pivoted aside. The creature was powerful, yet the longer the fight continued, the more accustomed Rusty became to its attacks. He was just about to drive his weapon into the creature's open maw when something unexpected happened. Rusty, help! His body suddenly began to dissolve into particles of mana. He leapt back and turned to the side. Gwen and Astrella were being chased by several creatures, and he had moved out of range of his summoner without realizing it. "Ha, the flag is mine!" Bartholomew seized the moment and pounced on the unguarded flag. "I have it, victory is mine!" He held it high, and a few students began to cheer. The shouting stopped almost immediately, which left Bartholomew confused. Rusty reacted at once, cutting down the monsters pursuing his summoner. Then he looked up, following the direction of everyone's gaze. If he had a human face, he would have been smiling. Someone he had expected to appear minutes earlier had finally arrived. Better late than never, was it? Everyone stared upward. Every summoner, every beast, even the raging Bartholomew froze, because atop the broken battlement, lightly panting and covered in dirt, stood Sibur. In his hand, held casually over his shoulder as if he had just finished a morning jog, was the B2 flag. Hey! Bartholomew's voice cracked. What? The young bearish man looked bewildered. He had just managed to seize the flag belonging to the B1 class, yet the one that was supposed to remain at his own stronghold was now here. That meant they were about to lose this fight and that his classmates had failed him. Useless. Why is everyone so useless? He shouted again and then pointed at Sibur with the B1 flag he was holding. Do not think you have won. As long as I have this flag, victory will be mine. Bartholomew shouted in anger and urged his bear-wolf toward Sibur. The rules were clear. The competition would end only when both flags were placed in the designated holes. As long as he held the B1 flag, he still had a chance to salvage the situation. That flag! Give it to me! Sibur did not move. He simply stood atop the shattered battlement while the wind tore at his bestial coat. His current form was a fusion of human and tiger, a form he disliked showing to others. Yet this time, he had chosen to use the power that some people despised. Sibur! Watch out! Astrella and Gwen, along with Rusty, saw the massive bear-wolf charging toward their friend. Rusty sprinted after it, and even though he was faster, there was no time to reach Sibur. Gwen followed close behind to widen the summoner range, but it still was not enough. Give that to me! Bartholomew roared and forced more mana into the mind merger until the bear-wolf beneath him trembled from the overload. Its veins bulged with a luminous crimson glow, and its claws cracked the stone as it barreled forward. Sibur did not flinch and, for some reason, he remained pressed against the battlement. As the bear-wolf lunged upward to strike him, he looked almost relaxed. Dust burst into the air as a sudden collision shook the area. The students froze. Some shouted when they realized what had happened. That is. Gwen pointed, and Rusty stopped beside her. Both of them watched the massive bear-wolf fly backward as it crashed into a creature of similar size. This one was a dark purple spider with its own rider clinging to its back. It is Arania! Astrella shouted as the enormous spider met the bear-wolf in midair. It looked as if Sibur and Arania had planned the ambush together and that she had been waiting behind him for the perfect opening. The bear-wolf still outweighed the armored arachnid, but when Arania unleashed a second attack in the form of a concentrated beam, the monster finally staggered. This might be my chance. Rusty had continued charging forward and reached the spot where the bear-wolf and its master had landed. The spider's attack had created a rare opportunity. The creature struggled against the beam's force and was forced to stand on its hind legs to shield its rider. I can see the underbelly. It is completely unarmored. Bartholomew urged his mount to its feet, raising its massive paws to guard against the onslaught. In doing so, he failed to notice the living armor racing toward him from behind. Rusty's halberd crackled with power as twilight energy swirled around him. He hurled himself forward with every bit of strength he had. Just as the spider's beam weakened and the bear-wolf began to recover, Rusty drove his halberd forward with all his might. The blade sank deep. A wet crack split the air as the halberd's enchanted edge tore through the unarmored underbelly of the bear-wolf. For an instant, time seemed to stop while Bartholomew's eyes widened in horror. His connection to the beast ran deep, and when the blade entered, he felt every moment of its agony. No. The mind merger snapped as the pain flooded his mind. Rusty's thrust drove upward, gutting the bear-wolf like a fish and inflicting even more damage. Particles of mana escaped from the enormous gash and Bartholomew's gaze twisted unnaturally. His mount struck the ground with a heavy thud a heartbeat later, and Bartholomew tumbled from its back, hitting the dirt while clutching his head. The bear-wolf convulsed. Its form began to unravel as mana poured from the fatal wound Rusty had opened. Within moments, the once towering creature collapsed and dissolved into fading streams of light. Is this the downside of his skill? Bartholomew, who had been loud and boastful only moments before, now writhed on the ground. His hands gripped his skull as if trapped in a raging migraine. His words had turned into meaningless noise, but Rusty paid him no mind. Instead, he looked to the flag that had fallen beside his armored boots. He picked it up and hurled it forward. Sibur caught it and sprinted back toward the flag area. He had already placed the B2 flag into one of the slots. The moment Rusty threw the B1 flag, the tiger-blooded youth lunged ahead. He snatched the pole cleanly out of the air with one swift motion, dropped to a knee, and drove the flag into the correct place without hesitation. No, stop him! One of the stunned B2 students cried out, but it was already too late. Everyone had been so focused on Bartholomew's downfall that they forgot the competition was still underway. The moment taught Rusty a valuable lesson, revealing how quickly troops could falter once their commander fell. Both flags were now secured in their proper positions, and the mechanism holding them was activated. A strange triple chime echoed across the battlefield. It was loud enough to reach the students still fighting in the forest, and they immediately stopped. Everyone understood that the battle had ended. We won? Gwen asked in a surprised tone. Of course, we won. We had the Metal Maiden with us. Astrella replied, teasing her friend. Gwen blushed when one of her titles was mentioned. Sibber dissolved the summon fusion shortly afterward and appeared from behind, which prompted Astrella to speak to him. I suppose you helped too? Sibber said nothing. His eyebrows twitched with irritation, but he managed to hold his anger in check. He had fulfilled the mission planned by Rusty. While Arania and the others kept the enemy occupied, he slipped into the opposing stronghold to retrieve the flag. Class B2 was mostly unaware of his D-rank battle power and focused much more on Arania and her spider. The plan was simple but effective. They left a smaller number of troops along with their supposedly strongest fighter and tricked Class B2 into focusing all their attention on her. The enemy believed that if the armored spider could be stopped, the entire B1 class would collapse. That did not happen, and it was their overconfident leader who suffered defeat. Perhaps if he had other people to help him, the result would have been different. Rusty stood there and looked at the young summoners. Half of them had their heads lowered in defeat, while others were cheering. He even saw tears running down the face of one of the humanoids. This strange competition seemed to matter a great deal to them. He did not understand why they cared so much about status or about being accepted by others, since he focused mostly on his own personal growth. To him, striving for others' acceptance made little sense, but he was beginning to understand the value of bonds between people. The world felt more interesting when it was shared. At first, it had been only him and Gleam, but now Gwen was starting to make her way into his metallic heart. He was not sure how long their relationship would last, yet for now it felt stable, even if he sensed that change might come soon. Congratulations! You have completed your mission. The moment the competition ended, this system message appeared before him. At the same time, everyone in the vicinity began to glow. It was the same spell that protected them from being killed, but now it simply pulled them back to the academy. There they are. B1 actually won. That is surprising. It must be because of that Metal Maiden. Her summon is incredibly strong. As the remaining students from B1 and B2 appeared outside, they were greeted by voices from both sides. The overhead orbs displayed scenes from their previous battles. There was no scoreboard for individual kills, but there was some type of ranking that showed which class had performed better. Rusty did not understand exactly how it worked, yet their number was 3 times higher than the other, which suggested they had done exceptionally well. It is astonishing how fast they finished this competition. I expected them to keep fighting for at least another hour. It really shows the difference in talent between them. More upperclassmen whispered among themselves while the students from B1 stood proudly, smiling. Their teacher approached them to congratulate them as all of them appeared at the teleportation gate they had entered through. Even though they had been victorious, his expression did not change much, but a faint smirk was still visible. All of you did well. You are free to rest, your credit will be calculated later, and as always, you will have the next 2 days free to recover. Everyone from B1 cheered as they had earned a reprieve. On the other hand, the chubby teacher from B2 looked furious. He was not good at hiding his disappointment, and instead of a reprieve, he already had more work for B2 in mind. I'm disappointed in you all. The chubby instructor snarled as he raised his voice for the others to hear. Extra drills. 2 hours. No excuses. Groans spread throughout the B2 ranks. A few glared at Bartholomew as he still sat hunched over, clutching his head, while others looked away, bitter and ashamed. Their teacher's words stung, but they knew they could not say anything back. They had lost this time, but as long as they recovered in the future, they could still make up for their failure. Take him to the healers. Harold spoke as Bartholomew remained under the side effects of the mind merger. As the losers retreated, the B1 class celebrated. Astrella was overjoyed, and even Eldrick and Aldrich had nothing negative to say about Gwen's performance. It seemed that her class had begun to accept her, and for Rusty, that meant his mission was complete and successful. Soon his body began to shimmer as it started to disappear. The forces that kept him in this place were fading, and he was returning to the Soul Forge. Rusty. Gwen reacted slowly at first, but as his summoner, she felt that something was different. They had spent a whole week together, and their connection had grown. He had never been summoned away, so she understood that something was wrong, and she instantly ran up to him. I have to go now, Gwen. Take care of yourself. And no, wait, why are you leaving? Just stay here with me, I still need you. Although Gwen had managed to overcome some of her major deficiencies, she was still not fully self-sufficient or confident in her competence. In her eyes, her success was tied closely to Rusty and his overwhelming presence. Well, I will be sure to come back, so until then, just get stronger and do not worry, you will, I will guarantee it. Rusty presented her with a thumbs up, a motion he had learned from the humanoids. He was not lying, since he knew that once he returned to the summoning chamber, he would be able to increase her stats and strengthen her summons. Even though she would not be as strong as before, it would likely be enough for her to remain in B class. Wait. For a moment, it looked like Gwen would cry and start begging for him to stay, but she stopped herself from speaking. Her bottom lip quivered for a moment before she seemed to come to some kind of revelation. I'll wait for you, I'll be stronger next time, so be sure to come back. The quivering of her lip lingered only a moment longer before her expression steadied. He was not sure how to describe it, but some of the uncertainty in her eyes had vanished and had been replaced by something new. It was not an expression she had worn before meeting him. It was clear that this young girl had slowly begun to change. Good. Grow strong, Gwen. I know that you can. His silhouette grew transparent. The academy, the cheering students, and Gwen's trembling hands blurred before him as the world turned bright. It did not take long before he found himself back inside the summoning chamber. That was quite something. He spoke as he took in the silence. The Soul Forge was devoid of chatter. For the past week, he had been forced to endure constant babbling, so he enjoyed the quiet, although not for long. Rusty, you're back. Alexander's light appeared first as he greeted him, and not far behind was a burden. I don't think that girl has the ability. We should replace her with another summoner before it is too late. A burden did not seem to like Gwen's performance and, just as many times before, he and Alexander began to argue. Congratulations on your return. Calculating rewards, please wait. Received medium experience talisman X1. Received small experience talisman X7. Received lesser strength enchantment talisman X1. Received lesser constitution enchantment talisman X1. As the two bickered, he examined his rewards. The enchantments he received were different and unfamiliar. The number of experience talismans had also increased, and one was even of a higher rank. However, this was not the end. There was another window he was waiting to appear. Congratulations! Your synergy with the summoner Gwendolyn Rainstar has reached a new level. You will be rewarded with summoner coins. For furthering the bonds with the summoner Gwendolyn Rainstar, you will be rewarded with additional summoner coins. Oh! He expected the first window to appear, but not the second. He quickly moved toward the console to look through the shop. He wished to reinforce Gwen's summoning repertoire with these coins, but he had underestimated how many he had received. Just as before, when he opened the shop, he was given the option to allow Gwen to summon additional monsters, but this was not the only possibility. A new section of the shop had opened, one that affected him rather than his summoner.